Right here on Talk Radio. It is just over a week until Christmas, and all through the House of Commons, not a creature is stirring. Not even a mouse. Do you see what I did there? You'll appreciate that after 10 months of lockdowns, fire breaks, closures, quarantines, travel bans and police actions, we are where we are. And this morning I will be attempting to figure out exactly where that is, because I don't think anybody is particularly sure. According to all the newspapers this morning, Boris Johnson is fighting for Christmas, while at the same time he's fighting for Britain over in Brussels. Later he'll be fighting at Prime Minister's Questions with Sir Keir Starmer, who will remain very calm at all times and say absolutely nothing of any note whatsoever. And then we will bring you all of that in the company of Talk Radio's political correspondent Charlotte Ivers. First up this morning, though, we're talking to William Clouston from the SDP about what happens after December the 31st, with the news this morning that Ursula von der Leyen reckons the next few days are going to be decisive. Really? Not exactly Mystic Meg, is it? Fishing apparently still a sticking point, but Brexit is coming in whatever form. According to those who are in the know, there is going to be a vote probably either Monday, Tuesday or Wednesday of next week. And let's face it, it becomes Christmas Eve then, and they'll all have to scurry home to their various different family Christmases. Or will they? Because, of course, Boris Johnson might cancel Christmas. Did you ever think you'd live in a world where your elected representatives could tell you whether or not you can open a cracker or not? 0344 499 1000. Meanwhile, we will speak to a GP today who's beginning COVID vaccinations in his surgery. But the system is already creaking with a shortage of fridges for storage, a shortage of training and a shortage of availability. Last night, I heard more tales of woe from the test and release scheme. So if you are scheduled for getting some kind of a vaccination today, we'd love to hear how easy or how difficult that has been. 0344 499 1000. Neil Oliver will also be here later to give us his take on the week. In the Sunday Times at the weekend, he confessed to missing people so much, he's even been thinking of heading to church. And we'll be joined by Charlie Ray, the former royal editor of The Sun, with the great news that the Duke and Duchess of Netflix are to take me on in the podcast charts with a series of kind and compassionate recordings for their army of fans. Good luck with that. Give me strength. You're listening to me, Mike Graham, on the fastest growing radio station on the planet. It is, of course, Talk Radio.
Mid-morning with Mike Graham. Talk Radio.
Now, I don't know about you, but the whole Brexit thing has become incredibly boring now, which is quite dangerous because the more bored you become with it, the less you care about how it actually ends up. And I wonder sometimes whether this is now the modern form of kind of water torture, where our politicians, our political leaders, our elected representatives go on and on and on and on with stuff for such a long time that everybody just gives up. It's a bit like fighting the old parking fines at Southwark Council. Eventually, you just pay them because you can't be bothered arguing anymore. This, I think, is where we are, and this, I think, is where we find ourselves. Let's talk to William Clouston, leader of the Social Democrat Party, to see where he thinks it's all going. William, a very good morning to you.
Morning, Mike.
There is a sense of this kind of overbearing boredom that we're all going through at the moment, either because of COVID or either because of Brexit or either because of Christmas. You know, everything seems to just drag on and on and on. Could it be that this is their policy?
Yeah, there's a sort of water torture aspect to this from the EU's point of view. That's true. I just think it is actually very important we get this final stage right. And as a party, we advocate a WTO solution. I don't think anything on the table from what you read from the EU is worth signing up to. Level playing field, no, that's just a way of the EU controlling us, controlling our industrial policy going forward. That can't be acceptable. Their position on fisheries and coastal state is ridiculous. And frankly, I think a lot of commentators are failing to look at the benefits of a WTO solution with a little bit of trade friction. In the sort of narrative, ever since the Brexit vote happened in 2016, there's been a preoccupation with trade deals and with this idea that you can't sell into the single market unless you're a member of the EU. I mean, Anna Soubry was on record at one stage saying that if we leave the EU, our exports will go to zero. Preposterous.
Yeah.
Actually, what we're arguing for is a change to a softer globalism, a more domestic focus in our policy, and to start being less indifferent to what is made where and by whom.
So you would take the view that that you don't necessarily have to promote British goods as such or British manufacturing, but you can in fact just encourage people to buy from wherever.
No, I think we would encourage British manufacturing. I think one of the problems, again, I mean, you spoke to John Rentoul yesterday, and you were discussing what the benefits from his point of view, because he's a Remainer, what the benefits of EU membership were, and the best he could come up with was that it stops a little bit of form filling at the border. Well, he's got to do better than that. Look at what the model. I'm not just talking about the EU, but I'm talking about our global trade policy model has done to, say, economies like the United States and Britain over the last 30 years. It's gutted industry, it's created permanent trade deficits, and it's beggared our consumers, because as a motor of growth, when people had high wages, when the factories were open and we were more productive, you relied on your consumer earning well and spending well. If you undermine that, if you hollow that out, which is basically what we've done, you get yourself into a situation where the only consumer spending that can take place is off debt. And look at the figures. Something like 63% of corporate profits in the UK are derived from either government debt or household debt. Well, that's not sustainable. And I would argue, I know, we're probably the only party arguing for this, but I want to see a pretty radical change from the existing pattern of not caring where things are made. I think we need to get industrial capacity up. Mike, manufacturing industry now in this country is only 10%, 11%.
Right.
It's pathetic.
Well, we're told, aren't we, and we have been told since the sort of Tony Blair era, that we are leaders in world financial services. And I think most people walking around in the streets of this country would say, actually, I'm not really sure what that is. What is world financial services, and what does it mean? Does it mean we've got loads of people working here from big corporate American merchant banks, taking loads and loads of money out of our economy and then taking it all back to America? What does it actually mean? But how do you get manufacturing back, William, when we've sort of allowed it to disappear to places like China, India, other parts of the world?
Well, let's just examine that. So, one of the examples I use is something you'll be aware of, which is and I'm using the United States as an example, but it applies to here because we've got the same policy basically. So if you go to Penn Station, you get the train from New York down to Philly. You will see it's 90 miles or something like that, and you've got wetlands and you've got suburbia and all sorts of other things. But you've got acres and acres of burnt out, basically gutted factories, which are now closed and are full of graffiti. And any society should be ashamed of that, actually. But what the cause of that, the real cause of that, is an indifference by those who govern us to what we make. What they've done is opened it up to China and to the lowest producer, the lowest cost producer globally to take all the business. And in the States, the result is unemployment, the mining out of the industrial wage. The industrial wage used to be the foundation of the family, and you dismantle that, and you effectively dismantle family life as well. I think there's been far too much indifference. A lot of this is caused by the ideology that a lot of politicians on the right, and even people like Tony Blair, who economically was pretty much on the right, of just being indifferent to it, saying leave it to the market. Well, if you leave it to the market entirely, you'll end up with one large factory making all the shoes in the world in China. By the way, under near slave conditions.
Well, that's what I was going to say. I mean, it's not really a free market if you're competing with a country which can afford to pay its workers barely any money at all and control them in such a way as it's not really in any way, economically viable in any other place.
No, it's not. I mean, it's not fair competition, and it's highly exploitative. And again, we're not caring about the conditions under which those workers are working. But strategically, I mean, we have a whole generation of politicians that have been terrified of any trade friction. Personally, I would go for some trade friction. I want a WTO solution precisely because it does give a little bit of protection to domestic producers. I know it's heresy to say this on the radio, but it would give a little bit of protection to domestic producers. And by the way, we'd also collect about 12 billion in tariffs.
Yeah. Well, interesting, isn't it, though, that during the whole kind of, at the height of the Brexit debate, I suppose you might call it that, when people were shouting through megaphones down in Westminster, you would always hear the Remainer argument, which was, you can't point to any place in the world that operates on WTO rules, which would be in any way viable for us. Is that true?
That's not true at all. I mean, it's nonsense. You could only want... We live in a country, as I say, where manufacturing is down at 10%. imports are over 30% of GDP. The difference to the economy, if the Bank of England and the Trade Department and everyone else was mandated to narrow those gaps, would be huge. I mean, you need to get manufacturing up to about 18%, and you need imports down to something like 25. Now, that can be done, but I would remind people that you cannot do it unless you take control of your own policy, your own industrial policy, create some special industrial zones, create some trade friction, and get some of these industries back. I mean, fishing is quite a nice example.
Yeah.
Where, you know, for as long as you stay in the EU, you can't control your fishing waters. I mean, do we want a fishing fleet in our own waters or not? Well, I think we fish something like 40% of the catch. And I'd accept in the talks. I would accept. Obviously, we don't have the capacity to fish it now. So
yeah, but we don't. But we don't have the capacity to fish it because we gave it all away to the French and the Spanish, and so it's a kind of it's a mighty, I think, national episode of self-harm that was started in the early 70s with Ted Heath, who said, well, actually, we don't really eat as much fish as you lot do, so why don't you just take it all away? And to then say, yeah, well, now we haven't got much of an industry. Well, guess what? That's exactly what happens, isn't it?
But that's because of the indifference, Mike. And again, I'm going to point the finger at the sort of globalist, liberal, free trade purists who literally think it doesn't matter if you produce anything. You know, that's the rhetoric we've had, and a whole generation of conservative politicians and New Labour think this. And I'm afraid, honestly, we're at the end of this road. The pandemic actually exposed the folly of this, where the country was reduced to near beggary to get basic supplies. And the whole idea that you would have a series of strategic industries which you'd actually protect and care for and make sure. I mean, the fact is, Mike, other countries do this. Go to South Korea and have a look at their corporations. And their government and corporations wouldn't dream of selling off their very best industrial assets.
Right.
In this country, we've had for years, absolutely years, it's Rowntree's, it's Cadbury's, it's the whole of British industry is for sale, and it's because we're completely indifferent to it. But
and surely the European Union has played its role in that, hasn't it? Because we have for so long been told by our masters, supposedly political masters, I use that very advisedly, by the way, because I don't see them like that at all. But we've been more or less told that we're not really supposed to be patriotic. We're not really meant to be nationalistic. We're not really meant to be jingoistic, because that's all wrong. And what we should be doing instead is supporting this great economic and social endeavour known as the European Union, for which we should all be very proud to be a part.
Well, that's just a very good way of tying your hands behind your back so you can be hit hard, basically. I mean, it's very foolish. I mean, and you know, my political hero, Peter Shaw, saw this in the 70s. You've got to be able to act in the interests of your citizens. Now, fair enough. I mean, a lot of the corporations the executives of the corporations are running the corporations for their own benefit. I mean, it's not just that they're overpaid, many of them, you know, and some of them, I think Ocado boss is getting £2,000 more than the average employee. Some of this is just obscene, but it's just that the decisions they've made in outsourcing factories. If you close a factory in Middlesbrough or Philly or whatever, and you outsource it, you harm that domestic economy a great deal. Now, it might make in the short term, it might give you some profits, but in the long term, you're headed for a permanent trade deficit. And again, I would just some very basic economics. If you permanently run trade deficits, I mean, you can only pay for imports in three ways. You can pay for imports by making something today which you sell, or selling something which you've made in the past or which you own, or by issuing debt. Now, that's a basic mathematical identity. That's just true. And year after year, our political class have said it doesn't matter that you have this great big trade deficit. We've got a 95 billion trade deficit with the EU, and I would argue that our most problematic trade partner is the EU. I mean, the sense of putting a little bit of trade friction between that. I mean, look at agricultural products. Do you really believe, Mike, that French agricultural products, whether it's cheese or wine or whatever, do you think that's the world price? Do you think we couldn't get equivalent products elsewhere if we wanted to?
Well, I'm sure we could. I mean, the fact is that there are certain things that were made exclusively by certain countries many years ago, but quite rightly now, lots of things can be made all over the place. I mean, we can make champagne in this country. Can't call it champagne, but some of the French companies are actually buying land in Kent in order to grow grapes because they think that's the future. So, I'm more than happy to continue to buy whatever is offered to me if I like the price. I don't particularly wish to be put into a kind of a straitjacket in terms of trade by any government, whether it's our own or somebody else's.
Yeah, you need to be. The key word is unfettered. You need to be. You need the government needs to act, and actually corporations need to get with this as well and start acting in the national interest. The interest of the corporation isn't always the national interest.
No.
I think that's something that we need to.
Would you offer tax incentives then, say for example, to a company that wanted to come into this country and start up a fishing fleet, for example? Because I sort of have quite a lot of faith in the fishing industry, as it were, because the one thing that we know there are in the sea is fish. So we might as well fish them out as opposed to letting somebody else do it. But in order to do that properly, we need somebody to invest in the business, buy a load of boats, and hire a load of people.
Yeah, that can be done quite easily. But the prerequisite is that you control your own fishing waters.
Yeah.
I mean that's. There's not a shortage of capital, Mike. I mean, there's plenty of capital. In fact, the global savings. I mean, there's a glut of capital. It's the question is to what productive use you can put that capital. So no, I mean it's a matter of will. What we're fighting against as a party and in the SDP, we're fighting against this indifference. People, our political class, have been indifferent to these things, and it should matter.
Yes.
It really, really should matter whether we have our own domestic fishing fleet. I mean, and so it's no problem at all. To be fair in terms of the talks, what you can't do is tomorrow or on the 1st of January suddenly say, well, get out of the waters, because we don't actually have the capacity to do it at the moment. But no, there's no, in terms of raising capital to buy that infrastructure and to get it back up and running, it's there.
Right.
Well,
it just seems like an obvious one to go for, because at the moment, if you want to suddenly boost manufacturing, there's some right old-fashioned manufacturing going on there of the fish business, which has been allowed to be in decline for so many years, which you could then fix.
Yeah, I mean, it's what you want is a rejig in the way we think as well, and I'm very encouraged because a lot of younger people get this, and actually there is a link to the environmental movement. I think you can only do what you can do domestically, but the sort of economic model that we've had, Mike, of your chest of drawers being full of 50 cheap t-shirts, I mean that's over. You'd be better off having 5 good ones, and I think a lot of people understand that.
Well, how about if you're over a certain age, you don't wear t-shirts anymore?
Oh, shirts then, yeah, whatever, yeah. But you get my point. I mean, the point is that I think we need to value what we buy more, and we need to buy less off debt and more, and we need to produce more domestically. And it can be done. You've just got to want to do it. And I see the pandemic actually, I think, will be one of these turning points in history where it really shouldn't. It won't be the same again, and it shouldn't be. And as I say, your conversation with John Rentoul yesterday. I mean, the best he could come up with is that you might not have to fill any forms. If he's missing the point, I mean, he's a nice guy, but he's not paying attention, because what you need to do is to change the entire system. Basically, you need to have a softer form of globalism, a form of globalism that lets you make your own social and economic bargains, and actually occasionally put your own citizens first.
And you segued nicely into the pandemic there, because my final question to you is about Christmas. I mean, when did you ever think that you would be told whether or not you could have Christmas by your Prime Minister?
Yeah, or his experts. Yeah, no, it's what can I say? We talked about this so much. What they don't grasp is that they've already told people what the rules are. So they've already said, these are the rules, these are the days that you can come and celebrate Christmas. And people in the real world, not in sort of, Westminster world, but in the real world, people have booked their time off from their factories and workplaces. Yeah. And they've booked trains and sometimes planes and other things. And they've made the arrangements. You can't suddenly say, by the way, you're not going to do it. Right. But to return to it, Mike, point I've made many times, if the government asks the public to do something reasonable, they will probably do it. If they ask for something unreasonable, you will get public defiance. And I'm afraid I would never advocate people openly, disobeying the law. But frankly, we're getting to the stage where people, decent citizens are just going to have to make their own arrangements, I'm afraid.
Absolutely right. And the inconsistency of the rules, I think, is what bothers most people as well. William, delightful to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. If we don't see you before Christmas, we'll see you afterwards. Hopefully you'll have a good one with however many members of however many households the laws require you to be able to do. We will talk some more about that coming up, of course, because this is the season to be, as Boris Johnson says, jolly careful. 0344 499 1000 is the number. We're live streaming on YouTube. We're on Facebook. We're on Twitter. We've got Neil Oliver coming up later on. We've also got Prime Minister's Questions, of course, with Charlotte Ivers. Lots to do, and we've got plenty of time to do it in. This is Talk Radio.
Talk Radio.
Welcome back to the Independent Republic of Mike Graham, right here on Talk Radio. Let's go to the call straight away because we need to get some common sense on the airwaves. 0344 499 1000. Simon is in Basingstoke. Hi, Simon.
Hi, Mike.
How you doing?
Very well, thank you. I have to say, Mr. Colston shocked me. I thought we didn't have any politicians in the UK with common sense left.
Yes. But, well, we've managed to fish and find them out, finally.
Well, that's great. I mean, you can look at what's happened in the United States under the Trump presidency. Whatever your criticisms of Trump that you may have, he brought back over 6 million manufacturing jobs in just 4 years to the United States.
Right. And he did it with relative ease in terms of threatening tariffs and all sorts on other countries, didn't he?
He did. I mean, to be honest, I think the main factor, in fact, was actually deregulation. But the UK is in a unique position. For a start, we have the NHS, which is the largest single purchaser of medical equipment, goods, pharmaceuticals in the world. So we should have a world-class industry, and that industry should not just be supplying the NHS, but it should also be developing new technologies and new techniques to make the NHS even more efficient and offer better care. But also we have a very strong basis in things like information technology.
Right.
The phone I'm calling you from, the microprocessor in that was designed by a British company.
Right.
Yet this country does not manufacture microprocessors. We don't even have an aluminium smelting plant that works in.
But is that because it's too expensive to do it here? For the company, for the companies that make them.
That is not the case, because the main costs of things like fabrication is the actual plant itself. It's
right.
not. It's the fact that you can pay someone $5 a day to do it is you wouldn't do that anyway.
No, right.
But the fact is that the whole idea of offshoring ignores really fundamental things. Firstly, as Mr. Colston pointed out, it generates wealth, real wealth. But also, it's vital to national security. How can you trust any electronic system that you have now, and everything from a plane to a missile, unless if that technology is in part provided by China?
By Huawei, yeah, exactly. No, absolutely right. But this is the trouble. We've allowed what was initially, I suppose, a commercial decision to make manufacturing of things happen elsewhere, to then suddenly find that infrastructure is now no longer something that we make. So now we have to go and buy it in from elsewhere.
I think that's true, but I mean, the way I look at it is this. Industrial power is military power at rest. America had a tiny, tiny army and air force before World War II. It had a large navy. Yet it managed to dramatically increase the size of all those services because it had the industrial might to do it.
Yeah, and it works out that actually it's a good idea to have it, by the way.
Exactly, and we've seen that. I mean, look at the chaos that there's been in the EU and elsewhere across the world, just because simple things like PPE is no longer manufactured in most countries. This is just the first pandemic. We'll almost certainly face future pandemics, but there are other issues, and I think it's a matter of national security. And John Adams actually wrote about this in The Wealth of Nations. He, the most cited
Adam Smith
free
wrote The
trade.
Wealth of Nations, didn't he?
Yeah, Adam Smith. Sorry, in the Wealth of Nations, he said that all the talk of free trade, you still have to consider the reality that national defence comes before that. And I think that's something our politicians have forgotten.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. You make some very good points, Simon. Great call. Thank you very much indeed. Simon in Basingstoke kicking us off there with a reminder that, yes, not only do we need to have our own national infrastructure, which we can manufacture, but we also need to take back control, and this is what the government says they want to do, of an awful lot of industry in this country. Surely that makes perfect sense, doesn't it? 0344 499 1000 is the number. Let's get some news headlines. This is Jenny Barsby.
Talk Radio. Half-hour headlines.
In the last few moments, the Court of Appeal has ruled that the sentences given to 3 teenagers for the manslaughter of PC Andrew Harper will not be changed. Henry Long, who's 19, was given 16 years, and 18-year-olds Jesse Cole and Albert Bowers were handed 13 years in July for killing the officer in August 2019. Heathrow Airport's won a Supreme Court case over its plans to build a third runway, meaning it can now go ahead. Heathrow had challenged a Court of Appeal ruling that former Transport Secretary Chris Grayling had failed to take the Paris Climate Agreement into account when supporting the expansion. A summary of the final decision has been provided by Lord Justice Sales.
This court holds that the Secretary of State acted rationally and in compliance with his legal obligations in preparing the environmental report. The Secretary of State took the Paris Agreement into account when he decided to issue the policy statement. He did not ignore it. For these reasons, the court unanimously concludes that the appeal should be allowed.
It's being suggested less than half of the UK will be vaccinated against COVID-19 next year. The NHS is hoping to inject 25 million over 50s with 2 doses throughout 2021, but the National Audit Office says coupled with an expanded flu vaccination programme, this will mean 50% of us having to wait an extra year. Meanwhile, Christmas coronavirus rules are widely expected to be left unchanged, despite growing concerns that allowing 3 families to meet up over 5 days will see a spike in infection rates. Discussions between the 4 nations are to continue this morning, and it's thought tougher messaging will be the most likely outcome. But Dr. Claudia Paolini, a hospital consultant and president of the HSCA, that's the Hospital Doctors Union, has told Talk Radio the government needs to be clearer.
If the message is mixed, it's very difficult for people to make choices. So one day it's not safe, the next day it is safe, and then it's not safe. That's a very mixed message. And if you want to keep to the very simple facts, this virus is transmitted by social contact. Allow social contact to be unchecked, and that virus will spread.
And the way UK airlines have dealt with their passengers during the pandemic is being investigated by the competition watchdog. It'll look into whether they breached consumer rights by not offering a cash refund to customers who are unable to take their flight. We have a band of heavy rain moving slowly from west to east today. It will be windy with gales in the west, but feeling mild.
Julia Hartley-Brewer at breakfast on Talk Radio.
Join me, Julia Hartley-Brewer, every morning from 6:30 with an essential mix of straight-talking debate, heavyweight political guests and fearless comment.
Julia Hartley-Brewer at breakfast. Weekday mornings from 6:30 on Talk Radio. Mid-morning with Mike Graham. Talk Radio. The Independent Republic of Mike Graham on Talk Radio.
Welcome back to the Independent Republic of Mike Graham right here on Talk Radio. We are, of course, on Wednesday preparing for Prime Minister's questions. I'm not sure. I think Keir Starmer will actually be in the chamber. I don't think he's still self-isolating, is he? Unless he's run into somebody else who might have had the virus. Let's go now, though, live to Dr. Lawrence Buckman, North London GP, former chair of the BMA GP committee, because Dr. Lawrence, this morning, I believe, you will be taking part in the vaccination process.
Yes, in about 3 hours' time, I'll start vaccinating.
Yeah, so how is that process been? We've heard a variety of different stories. We've got figures this morning from Nadine Sahawi, who is the vaccination minister, saying that they've managed to get 137,897 people vaccinated in the first week of this process, which some wags have pointed out will mean it will take about 9 years to do the whole country.
Yeah, that's about right if you work it like that. The fact is that all we've got is vaccine sufficient at the moment to do the very elderly, which is all that we ever thought we were going to do before Christmas. And the fact is each hub, and our clinic is a hub, will have 900 and something vaccines to use up. And they have to be used very quickly. So that's how he can know with such accuracy how many people will be done, because that's how much stuff he's got.
Yes. So in terms of how many people you will vaccinate today, do you know what that number is?
Yes, we're doing them. now, apparently, I'm going to be doing them this afternoon at every 2.5-minute intervals.
Okay.
With other people doing other stuff, and I'm going to be doing it for 4 hours.
That's pretty quick, isn't it? It's a quick turnaround, that.
Yeah, well, there won't be a lot of time for conversation, but they will have had the conversation with other people. What we're doing is a sort of running process where they come in, they're checked in to make sure they are who they say they are. We're not just doing our own patients, by the way. We're doing the whole of the area. And
so these will be. Will these be people who have had a letter then from you?
Yes. Yes, they've been called either by telephone or by letter from the NHS vaccination service.
Right, okay. So a lot of them, presumably, if they are older and elderly, will be quite, perhaps not that mobile, right?
Well, those who are immobile will have to be visited at home, and that be done at home.
Right.
But that's going to be a different process. So the ones we're doing are people who are able to be mobilised into the surgery.
Because I was talking to a friend of mine who's a nurse, right, and she was telling me that she got vaccinated at the weekend, not because she particularly was expecting to be vaccinated, but because some people who were supposed to be vaccinated in the hospital where she works weren't able to make the appointment for one reason or another. So they had to get rid of the vaccines because, as you say, you can't store them for very long.
No, you basically got effectively 3.5 days storage,
right?
Which takes us to the weekend. So
right.
Any that we've got left behind, it's 25 quid a shot.
Right.
So if you get a lot of wasted money.
Well, say for example you get to Friday afternoon and you've still got quite a lot left because for whatever reason people weren't able to get to you, or some of them didn't fancy it or whatever. I mean, how would people know that? Are you able to kind of advertise that you've got the vaccine?
I think surgeries locally will telephone round to see anybody else who falls into the age group.
Right.
What we're not going to do is start doing anybody who says, please, can I?
Right.
But certainly anybody elderly or infirm who's of the right age, we'll start contacting them in the event that we have spare. It's calculated that we've called more people than we've got vaccine for. So that shouldn't happen.
Okay.
I mean, as you say, it might.
Now, I spoke to a doctor day before yesterday, I think it was, who was talking about the problems he was having with test and release. Now, I don't know whether you know anything about that. I know it's off to the side. It's a slightly different subject. But I've also been hearing stories from people that the test and release scheme is really not working at all well because so few people have been licensed to do it and so few counties have been licensed to do it. And in fact, the doctor I spoke to said he was required to register as a laboratory in order to operate it. Did you have to do that?
No, we're not doing it.
But I mean, did you have to operate as a laboratory in order to give out the vaccine?
No. You have to be a designated centre to do that, and that's a different process.
Yeah.
The test and release scheme, which I think is actually not a terrible idea, it's just to make people laboratories. They're clearly not laboratories.
Yeah.
They're not geared for that. It's made something I'm afraid typical for the NHS. It's made something bureaucratic out of something that didn't need to be.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, and I always take Sir David English's view on good ideas. It's only a good idea if it works, and if it doesn't work, it's not a very good idea. So, but let's get back to your situation, because also there are reports this morning that there's been a bit of IT problem with this vaccination rollout. There's also been a lack of fridges supplied and all of that. So, it's as you say, they sort of seem to manage to find ways of administratively screwing things up.
Yes, the IT is unusually different to what we're used to, but that's often the case with new IT in any environment. And something as big as this, where the IT has got to talk to every other bit of the NHS.
Right.
It really is very complicated, but I've managed to make it work for me anyway.
Yeah,
it seems to be fairly straightforward, although some of it's counterintuitive.
Sure, because you've got to, in the end as well, release these guys today and then say, can you please come back in 3 weeks or 20 or 25 days or whatever it is?
Yes, all of that has to happen today.
Right. So, I mean, have you had to boost your staff? Have you had to do anything else that you would otherwise be doing? Have you had to stop seeing other people? Because a lot of people have said to me over the course of the last few weeks, it's been quite difficult even getting into a GP surgery because some GPs are either not there or they're nervous of people coming who haven't had a COVID test.
Right, there's two separate things. One is the hubs, like us. I'm a draftee in.
Right.
I'm one of the many people who've been drafted in to come and help out my old practice.
Okay.
to help them out because they are short of people. But by merging practices together into hubs, they've been able to get round that. So that hasn't been a problem. Now, of course, the patients of the practices that are in the hub there is an emergency service, but that's all it is, because they can't possibly do two things at once. And clearly, patients are going to be other patients are going to be inconvenienced by this. Of course they are.
Right.
Elsewhere, there are GPs who understandably are very nervous about looking after people who could have COVID. And that's why there's a COVID service, for whom I also work, that assesses people away from the surgery.
Right. And what's your general view, Dr. Lawrence, just on the state of the virus right now? Because you and I have had many conversations over the last sort of 7-8 months about where we are. Where do you think we are? Because I'm hearing still an awful lot of those people in the NHS who complain that they don't want to see the service being overwhelmed. Even though that hasn't happened, they're still concerned that it might happen in January, or it might happen in February. But we also hear from other people who say, yes, we have to learn to live with this particular virus, and some of them are medical people, without having to shut everything down every 5 minutes.
Yeah, I think it's a very fine balance between locking people up in their homes on their own, which clearly is very safe, but doesn't do much for society and would bankrupt everybody.
Yeah.
Or you allow people in a complete free-for-all and say, well, herd immunity will rescue the healthy ones. That's fine, except that there's such a thing called long COVID, which is a terrible burden on people who get it. And, of course, the percentage of people who are going to die from it. And because of that, you can't just say, let's have a free-for-all. So what you have to do is see what you can do to make the place as safe as possible. And I think at the moment the virus is accelerating, and I'm not entirely sure why that is. I suspect it's because people have relaxed their guard a bit. And I don't blame them. They've had months and months of this. And it's how do we persuade people to be a bit more careful rather than lock them away? And it's how you balance these. I don't think it's a clever argument. I'm pleased I'm not a politician.
I'm very pleased you're not a politician as well, because you could probably be not saying any of what you've just said. But the bottom line is as well, for many people, they say, yes, it's all very well to talk about long COVID. We don't know much about it. We don't really know how many people it's affecting. And in general, there are many things that people suffer from and that they get, and they become ill, and sometimes they die. And in the end, we're going to have to start looking at this like one of those diseases, aren't we?
Yes, and that's why there is a COVID assessment service that deals with these cases, and that's why I work for them. And they are there to try and maintain as much normality in the NHS as possible. Yeah. And you're quite right. For many people, this is going to be a trivial nothing. Unfortunately, we don't know who they are compared to the people who are going to get ill and either get ill chronically or worse, die. And on their way out, they're going to cost the NHS an awful lot of money, which it wasn't planning on spending. Right. So you have to conserve the NHS. You hear terrible stories of people who've got non-COVID illnesses who need to have an emergency operation, or they've got cancer, or they've got heart disease, and they need help now, and they can't get it because the hospital's full up of COVID patients. So collectively, we have to do something to make the health service work efficiently enough that it can cope with the COVID. Now, largely, sorry to say, it comes down to money, and society has to decide how much it wants to spend on letting people live their lives normally versus locking them up to protect society and the NHS. It's a balance, and it's really challenging. And I don't think it's an easy one to give a glib answer to.
Yeah, well, I don't think they're getting it right at the moment. Dr. Lawrence Buckman, thank you very much indeed. North London GP, former chair of the BMA GP committee. It seems to me that every single year we are told that the NHS is in crisis. Every single winter we are told the NHS is in crisis. Now, if the NHS is in crisis every single year, what does that tell you? Well, it tells me that the people running the NHS aren't very good at it, and they need to get better at it. And the idea that we need to somehow give them more money to do that is an absolute and utter nonsense, isn't it? Because they've got more money than Croesus, the NHS. I mean, nobody gets more money than the NHS, but they waste an awful lot of it. And it seems to me that the way that this government and most governments across the world are dealing with COVID is entirely incorrect. Because what they could be doing is actually taking a view on the disease. And that's what I think a lot of people would like them to be doing. 0344 499 1000. Coming up, it's Harry and Meghan.
Across the UK, online, on DAB, and on your smart speaker. Talk Radio. On Talk Radio.
Welcome back to the Independent Republic of Mike Graham, right here on Talk Radio. Now, some of you may know that we do a podcast from this show every single day. It comes out every single afternoon. It's very successful. It's in the iTunes podcast charts. It does very well, and many of you listen to it on a very regular basis. I also do another podcast with Kevin O'Sullivan called The Thought Police, which is also quite successful and also in the charts. Now, would you believe it? After all I've said about them, Harry and Meghan are now going to join in the podcast fray. This is what they're going to be doing.
Should we start? No? Ladies first?
No, say it, because I think it sounds really nice with your accent.
What, Archwell Audio?
Yeah.
Archwell Audio.
I mean...
Really?
Shall we?
Yeah, let's do it. Hi guys, I'm Harry.
And I'm Meghan. One of the things my husband and I have always talked about is our passion for meeting people and hearing their stories. And no matter what the story, they usually offer you an understanding of where someone else is coming from. And at the same time, remind you in some way of a story about yourself.
And that's what this project is all about, to bring forward different perspectives and voices that perhaps you haven't heard before, and find our common ground. Because when that happens, change really is possible.
And you know, this is also a moment to celebrate kindness and compassion, something we saw in so many places this year, and which will underlie everything you hear from Archwell Audio. So that's what we're up to. And first up
is a holiday special.
A holiday special? Give me a small break. Let's talk to Charlie Ray. Charlie, for heaven's sake, I mean, just when you thought that, they couldn't get any more cheesy, it's now the king and queen of Spotify.
It's ridiculous. I mean, I listened to the 3-minute trailer that they've put out that you've just played part of this morning. And to be perfectly honest, if anybody can stand more than 30 seconds when it actually arrives on the airwaves this month, I'll be very surprised. They would deserve a medal. I mean, this really is past the sick bucket time, to be perfectly honest. I mean, it is awful, absolutely awful. And I have to say, Mike, I have got no objection to this pair making money. That's one of their avowed intentions, was to be self-sufficient and not be a burden on the taxpayer. Fantastic. Apparently, on top of their 100 million Netflix deal, this one's going to cost, give them something like 30 odd million. We're not too sure how much, but it's only for 6 months and can be extended. What I object to is that clearly they're using their royal connections, i.e. their titles, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. If this was Mr. Harry Wales and Mrs. Meghan Wales or Meghan Markle, they wouldn't get a second chance at anything like this. And I would say, let's strip them of their titles. They're no longer members of the royal family, and they should not be trading in on them at all.
Well, I don't understand why they could still use the names. I thought that was all over and done with, and I thought they'd agreed that they wouldn't use the name and they wouldn't use Sussex Royal, and all of that was gone by the wayside. But what I'm looking forward to, Charlie, is finding some common ground with them, because, of course, that's what they say they're looking for, because I'm not sure how much common ground most people would have with people that live in an 18,000 square foot house with 9 bedrooms, 16 bathrooms and 5 acres of land.
Well, there is no common ground with them, and you know, another bone of contention is, Michael, that you know they left Britain and said that's it, we can't stand it anymore. You know, we're having such a hard time. We want to be private people. We just want to be left alone. Well, as I said to you before, Mike, there isn't a day going by that they're not in the news somewhere. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. They are invading their own privacy.
Right.
I am tired of hearing about them, anymore. Well, sorry, that's not true, because I love hearing about them because I come and talk to you about them.
No, but I mean, it is remarkable. They just are, in their own words, in the kind of the technological terms of how we now speak, they are about as tone deaf as I can think of anyone being, because there are people genuinely suffering around the world. There are people genuinely having a hard time, not least because of COVID or because of something else in another part of the world, but they're doing literally nothing for anyone apart from themselves. I mean, they've even said we will be talking about our stories, ourselves. It's all about them.
That's right. I mean, they're just a very woke and right-on couple. I mean, they're not... You know, one of the things that, is amazing about the royal family is the combined the number of good works that they do. They go down and they visit people who are, hard done by, who haven't got 2 brass farthings to rub together, and they help. And that, they go down and offer help in raising money and everything else. And these two just seem to have gone away from all that, but still want to be the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. What they agreed not to use was the HRH titles and obviously Sussex Royal, but they're still linked to the royal family, and they are very much being seen now as the King and Queen of America.
They really are the king and queen of cheese, I think, at this point, because, to be honest, the most ludicrous thing that I heard in all of that was Harry referring to the holidays. You know, he's obviously forgotten that Christmas is a thing, because in America it's the holidays.
Yeah, I know he's... And it doesn't surprise you to find out that the force behind all this, the driving force, was one Meghan. You know, she's definitely out there, and you know she's now invested in some sort of coffee cup company, which has been run by a female entrepreneur.
Of course it has.
And guess what? She sent a basket of this coffee round to Oprah Winfrey.
Of course she has.
Who then showed the world on her show that my friend M, you know, sent me some coffee. It's a latte. It's some sort of awful coffee that you and I would never ever drink.
Right. It's just horrendous, isn't it? It really is. They just live in an absolute world of their own. No ideas at all. Charlie, great to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed. Charlie Ray, former Royal Editor of The Sun. As appalled as I am, and as appalled as all of you are, judging by your reaction on Twitter, to this latest manoeuvre by the Prince and Princess, the Duke and Duchess of absolute and utter narcissism. What a joke. This is Talk Radio.
Talk Radio.
Independent Republic of Mike Graham right here on Talk Radio. Just over a week to go until Christmas. You wouldn't know it, would you? There's not much of a festive feel in the air. I mean, there could have been a festive feel in the air if they hadn't actually shut everything down. But of course, for those people in the rest of the country that have been shut down for quite some time, they've now done it to us in London. Tier 3 status. Tier 3 status may be given to other places later on today. Some places are hoping to move back to Tier 2 status. Some places are hoping to move out of Tier 2 into Tier 1. None of that sounds terribly festive to me, does it? Who ever thought that we would be giving the Prime Minister of this nation basically confirmation and permission to tell us whether we could have Christmas or not? We'll be talking to Neil Oliver coming up in this hour. I'm sure he'll have something to say about all of that. Also, of course, Brexit is still happening, or possibly not happening, depending on who you talk to. Ursula von der Leyen says that she's got some encouraging signs that they may well have a deal of one kind or another, which can be voted upon in Parliament next week, before Christmas. More Christmas presents. I mean, I just think the government's being too kind to us, isn't it? 0344 499 1000 is the number. We've just heard Meghan and Harry's new podcast. Coming up later, we'll hear from Tom Cruise, who's not happy with some of the people that work for him, who apparently have not been, shall we say, adhering to the social distancing rules while working on the new Mission Impossible film. I think this could change his image around forever. I think people will now look at Tom Cruise and go, wow, he's actually got quite an interesting turn of phrase, hasn't he? Swears quite a lot as well, which would make him very welcome on one of the podcasts that I do on Spotify, which I can tell you now will be a lot better than anything Meghan and Harry put out. 0344 499 1000. You're listening to me, Mike Graham, on the fastest growing radio station on the planet. It is, of course, Talk Radio.
Mid-morning with Mike Graham. Talk Radio.
Carry on Christmas is the headline on the front page of the Daily Mail, and your heart kind of sinks slightly because unfortunately it's not very funny. Let's talk to Neil Oliver, who's up in Scotland, unless he's made a break for it and appearing somehow in the Witness Protection Programme. Neil, a very good morning to you. How are you, Neil?
Good morning, Mike. No, I'm still here.
Good.
I'm fine, thank you. Thanks for having me again.
Not at all. Very good to see you. We worked out today that we've been talking to Peter Hitchens for 37 weeks, and I think you must be not far behind him. It's quite remarkable how many people have watched what we've done, watched what we've said, listened to what we've said. In the millions, basically. And yet the political masters that we have don't seem to be taking any bleeding notice.
Well, no, it's just that the divide that has now solidified between, I think, a great deal, a large proportion of the general public and the supposed elected leaders, and the two paths have diverged in a wood somewhere, and to some extent we're moving in different directions.
Yes, it seems incredible, doesn't it? Because only, I suppose, 2 weeks ago, we thought, well, we're coming out of a lockdown. Hopefully things will improve. Christmas is coming. It looks as though we will be able to see more people. And a lot of people are fed up to the back teeth of being told what they can and cannot do anyway. But in the last few days, again, they seem to have this ability to sort of plunge us back into the darkness.
it's the way in which confusion is stirred into the mix along with everything else. If the leaders and the people making the decisions, if they're reacting moment by moment to the last conversation that they had with somebody else that they thought was worth listening to, and make policy on that basis, but out in the real world in which the rest of us move around, people have made arrangements. People have booked time off work, or they've arranged this, that, and the other. They've ordered provisions and whatever, and they've made travel plans. And if there's any possibility of those being cancelled now, or people having to significantly modify what they thought was coming, then that just adds carnage into the mix for people who are trying to go about the business of living as much of an ordinary life as they can. And people can't be expected to react moment by moment on the whim of politicians and scientists.
No, I mean, I was talking to some people yesterday after we filmed Plank of the Week. We were talking about the restaurant business and the pub business, and Carol Decker was with us, and she has a friend who's only just now, I think, as of yesterday, managed to reopen their restaurant, having made it COVID secure, only to be greeted with the news that, well, that's all very well, but now we've got to shut it again. And you kind of can't believe what people have been put through here.
Well, I mean, I don't run a restaurant, I never have, but I can imagine that it involves bringing in a lot of fresh produce that you have to use. A certain amount of meat, a certain amount of fresh veg, and all the rest of it, and you'd invest a great deal of money based on the number of covers you thought you were going to do on a given week or a given month, and that has to be, you have to make use of that stuff before it spoils. And to go through all of that, make that investment, show that commitment to your business, and then be locked down or have your staff taken away from you, your doors closed or whatever, all of that stuff presumably just has to be, I don't know, maybe given away.
Yeah.
Maybe, people just give it away to homeless charities or whatever. But in any event, what had supposedly been part of the ingredients for a profit for the company to keep their wheels on the wagon, now gets knocked away from them again. And it's just one step forward, 10 steps back, for people whose livelihoods depend on their ability to make informed decisions about reality.
Because we keep hearing from those people inside the NHS. There was another one, an anaesthetist, I think she was, on Julie Hartley-Brewer's show this morning, going on about how in January and February are the toughest months for the NHS. And we hear this every single year, that the NHS is in some kind of crisis because there's not enough money in the system, which is complete and utter tosh as far as I'm concerned. There is no organisation that gets more money in this country than the NHS. And frankly speaking, if we are worried about the NHS not being able to cope with people being sick, then what is it for exactly?
And what that whole bit at the beginning of the lockdown, which seems like something from another era, which provided the time to create those Nightingale hospitals, of which there were several, which were never called into play, even when I believe that the peak of the first spike was the most threatening, when we didn't have any idea.
I think we just
put in place.
Yeah.
All of that provision was put in place with the Nightingale hospitals that had supposedly been built to take any overspill. And as I understand it, at the moment, there aren't excess deaths that would stand out in any long graph, for the last 10 years or whatever. So there's nothing, there is nothing particularly different about this year compared to other years, apart from the fact that the politicians and the scientists have created a crisis.
Yeah.
As I understand it, it's not a medical crisis at the moment. The medical situation is under control and always has been. But the political and economic crisis is man-made.
Yeah. Well, it totally is. And this is the other thing that we're sort of faced with is, the idea that, well, of course, we have to be careful about our social activity. Well, I'm sorry. Social activity is what we do. We are a social animal. We are a sociable collection of individuals. And you cannot look at me and say to me with any great sense that I'm going to understand it, you best not really meet anyone very much for the rest of time, because this virus is going to spread and kill you.
It's all, for me, there's a much bigger picture. We all appreciate, what COVID means and what, and the measures that had to be taken. We get that, up to here we are with what has to be done to combat COVID. But there's a bigger picture. And if you draw back and look at what's going on, the question for me is, how close does it all have to come home before before we stop turning a blind eye and a deaf ear to the misery of other people. It's almost like a modern parable. I read this week about the fact that in the Xinjiang province in China, where a fifth of the world's cotton is made, so everyone wearing nice, comfortable T-shirts and pants and socks made of cotton, it's coming out of that area, and all the evidence suggests that the people there are working in the cotton industry in conditions that are like modern slavery. So if you're wearing those clothes bought cheap online, then your comfort is spun from the misery of other people. And likewise, we've spoken before about the smartphones and the laptops and the electric cars, which are based around batteries that are made of lithium ion and solder on the circuit boards that's made of tin. And lithium and tin are harvested in dreadful regimes where people, again, children included, are working in conditions like modern slavery. And yet people are using the phones. I am as well. The laptops, thousands of people are driving about in those electric cars feeling good about themselves. But there is no getting away from the fact that any comfort and satisfaction that you feel is built upon the misery of others. Now, those people are far away. They're in Africa. They're in China. They're out of sight and effectively out of mind. But now we have the lockdown. Now, for lifetimes, everyone who works pays tax into the common pot. And now a certain amount of people have been put on furlough, where they're being paid from that communal pot, and yet others, millions who have also made the contribution to that communal pot, have for the best part of a year been left with nothing. So if you are furloughed, if you are paying your bills and buying food for your family and all the rest of it based on furlough, well, through the wall or just up the road is a self-employed family or someone in the private sector who hasn't had help or a way of making a living for 9 months, then your comfort and security is happening on account of the misery of other people. Now, it was one thing when those people are thousands of miles away, but at the moment, people are turning up the misery of neighbours, people whose businesses are being destroyed, whose mental health is being destroyed, whose other ailments other than COVID are being neglected, but they cannot make a living at the moment. How close does it have to get? And for me, the sharpest, cruelest cut of all are the elderly and the infirm in their care homes. Now, those were people, many of them with dementia and other conditions, whose hold on life, on reality, was predicated upon daily visits from loved ones. And for the best part of a year, they've cut off from that and they're dying lonely deaths because they've got nothing to live for. So at what point do we acknowledge the misery of other people? This is supposed to be Christmas time, goodwill to all men. And in what way are we demonstrating that, manifesting that in any real sense? When all about us, we're wearing, people, cotton clothes harvested by slaves, smartphones and electric cars predicated upon modern slavery under awful regimes. And now we've got people through the wall, up the road, unable to fend for themselves, unable to feed their families, unable to pay their mortgages. And still a deaf ear and a blind eye is being turned to all of that. And I do wonder, when there's a reckoning, when all is said and done, and we look back at how we treated one another, will we believe that as a society we have done right? Yes. And I very much doubt it. Because I feel a sickening sense of shame.
Well, you're absolutely right, Neil, because we've also entered this bizarre period, which for me is kind of punctuated by politicians who believe that they know best and that only they know best, and that the way that the Nicola Sturgeon speaks, the way that Mark Drakeford speaks, less so Boris Johnson, but certainly Matt Hancock, where they talk about you and your family as though you would willfully do them harm, as if you would, in fact, invite separate members of your family to come and join you, knowing full well that you might be killing them. I mean, it's complete, absolute balderdash, isn't it?
Well, they're taking agency away from people. We're all capable. Everyone, if you're lucky enough to have a family, most blessed of all, contact with an extended family, which means that you've got, age ranges from babies through toddlers to the elderly at the other end of the spectrum. We all know and understand instinctively the needs of those people, and for people who've got elderly parents, elderly relatives, or people who are suffering from, complicating, health circumstances, diabetes, heart disease, respiratory problems, and all the rest of it. And we look after our loved ones. And if people would just be left alone to make those decisions for themselves without those that don't know us, don't know our families, seeking to lay down diktats, rule by fiat, as we're incapable of making any of those decisions for ourselves, it's insulting. But worse than that, it takes away and it undermines people's belief in their ability to take care of themselves. It's not a society, a nation of babies. In the most part, it's a nation of people who are already in the business of taking care of their families and making the complicated decisions about life, part of which is making sure that people who need care are taken care of. And we don't need that done for us by people standing behind podiums,
No, exactly right. Now, you'll be delighted to know, Neil, that your line's a bit fuzzy today, but we're going to stay with it because there's something I want to talk to you about which is not COVID related, you'll be delighted to know. And it's a piece in the Times today about an Egyptian archaeologist uncovering one of the biggest treasures of Egyptology in Scotland. Now, this is your area of expertise, so what do you make of it all?
Well, it's very exciting. Something that was recovered from the Great Pyramid in the early part of the 20th century and was put into storage was lost and forgotten, effectively. Safe, but lost and forgotten and overlooked in storage in Aberdeenshire, I believe.
Yeah.
And some researcher has been going back through the storeroom and has stumbled across it. It's like a cigar box shaped thing with the Egyptian flag on it. And on opening it, what was found inside was a piece of cedar wood, which has been radiocarbon dated to about 5,000 years ago. And it was found inside the Great Pyramid. And it's believed to be a ruler, a bit of kit for measuring, used by ancient Egyptians, possibly, in the building of the Great Pyramid itself.
Wow.
And so this thing has been lying out of sight and out of mind, in a storeroom for all of that time. And now it's been brought back into the light. And I mean, and it's almost poetic, I would say, that of all things, it's a ruler, because from ancient times, our species has desired to apply order and measure to the chaos of the reality around us. It's no coincidence that ruler means simultaneously something with which you can measure, and it also means somebody above us, like a king or God, who lays down the law and makes the rules. Even better, it's made of cedar wood, and people possibly associate cedar with Lebanon. That lovely song by Paul Brady, The Island. The skies of Lebanon are burning, those mighty cedars bleeding in the heat. And Lebanon was founded by the Phoenicians, and the Phoenicians were the great builders of the ancient world. Their capital was Byblos, from which we get the word Bible and bibliography and book. And it was their alphabet that gave us the written alphabet that we use today. But they were great builders. And King Solomon, the biblical King Solomon, brought the Phoenicians to Jerusalem 1,000 years before the birth of Christ, 800 years before the birth of Christ, and had them build his first temple. The temple in Jerusalem was built by the Phoenicians. And no doubt they had rulers made of cedar wood. Now, I'm not suggesting that the Phoenicians had anything to do with the Great Pyramid. It was built by the ancient Egyptians. But the fact that almost nothing was found in the modern era in the Great Pyramid, it was looted in antiquity. And so it was only fragments left behind. But how perfect and how meaningful that something that may have been used in the building of the structure itself has been found. We've just been talking about things close to home being overlooked, being precious things among us that attention was not being paid to. And here we find, by chance, in a storeroom, something so valuable that tells us something about what it is in our species that we have always needed to be able to lay order in order to make sense of the world around us.
See, this is why I wanted you to talk about this, because all I could think about when I saw the story this morning was that the ancient Egyptians sort of managed to become extinct, despite the fact that they were some of the most clever and ingenious people ever to have lived on the earth. And it made me think of where we're ending up.
It's very interesting that when you say that, there's an existential crisis around the ancient Egyptians. Their civilization lasted for 3,000 years. By the time Cleopatra, was walking about in the temple of Karnak, okay? Now, Cleopatra is closer to our time than she was to the people who built the pyramids. Okay, that's the span of time that the Egyptian civilization goes across. But they became preoccupied with death. It became a society that was preoccupied not with what was happening to the living in the living world, but was making all of its preparations, especially for the elite, for what was going to happen in the next life. And they took their eye off of the living world. And in a very profound and meaningful way, it became a kind of a moribund, morbid society. And eventually, the rest of the world that had life and a preoccupation with the living flowing through it like fresh water, Egypt was left behind like a kind of lagoon, a kind of a backwater. and it fell away from everybody's consciousness. And so even though it had lasted for all of that time, and it had managed to sustain itself and to maintain an idea across not just centuries but millennia, because it stopped paying attention to the living and became overly fascinated by death and the dead, in time it became nothing more than the Great Pyramid is essentially the biggest gravestone on the planet.
Well, isn't that interesting? Because I fear that this is where we are going, that we are becoming fascinated and obsessed with COVID and the people who die of COVID, from COVID, with COVID, despite the fact that it's not and shouldn't be a dominating situation. But for the whole world, it seems to be.
Yeah, I think we've got a tendency as a species, we're programmed to take for granted what doesn't change around us. You look out of the window and the static things, the houses, the things that are always there, the trees, you don't see them. And you're programmed to spot the moving object, a sparrow or a squirrel in a tree. That's what captures your attention. And so in our situation at the moment, what has appeared like a terrifying big squirrel moving fast is COVID. Yeah. And everyone, like a cartoon cat, our society's attention has just focused on this one thing. And everything else in the picture is being left out of sight. And you know that bit at the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark, where they take the Ark, and to keep it safe, they put it in a big warehouse full of other important things. And instinctively that it's going to be safe in there, but also that it's going to be forgotten. It's going to be hiding in plain sight. It will go into that space, and as soon as we turn our backs on it, although it's safe, it will to all intents and purposes be forgotten. And there's something very important that we should learn from that. We've put the elderly and the infirm away somewhere safe, out of sight, where we don't have to look at them. And at the same time, we're forgetting them. Those people are there and not there at the same time, and it's too easy to forget them. And in the example of that cedarwood ruler from the Great Pyramid, it was only by chance that somebody doing diligent, careful work stumbled upon something very precious that, although it had been put somewhere safe, had fallen from everyone's attention and to all intents and purposes was lost and forgotten. And we are losing and forgetting things very close to home, through the wall, in the building up the road. We're not paying attention to them. And something important and precious is being lost, just like that cedarwood ruler from the Great Pyramid.
Fascinating. Neil, great to talk to you again. Thank you so much. You speak for so many people, and we've already got people thanking you for speaking up for those who work for themselves, who haven't had any help over this. Neil Oliver, archaeologist, TV presenter, philosopher, I call him now as well, because what a remarkable take on what has been found up there in Aberdeenshire from the Great Pyramid of Giza back in the ancient Egyptian times. Because, you might think we've gone a bit mad now. You might think now they're talking about ancient Egyptians. Well, hey, what? Listen, these are the people who made all sorts of incredible things, and nobody could quite believe how clever they were. And then suddenly they were gone, right? So let's not take it too lightly, and let us indeed remember what we should be remembering. Don't forget things, because after a while, they won't be there anymore. 0344 499 1000 is the number. This is Talk Radio.
Talk Radio. On Talk Radio.
Welcome back to the Independent Republic of Mike Graham. PMQ's coming up at midday, of course, in the company of Charlotte Ivers, as ever. Ian Collins will be here at 1 o'clock. Right now, let's get some news headlines. Here's Jenny Barsby.
Talk Radio. Half-hour headlines.
The Court of Appeal has ruled the sentences given to 3 teenagers for the manslaughter of PC Andrew Harper are neither too harsh or too lenient. The 28-year-old was killed while on duty in Berkshire in August last year. Challenges were brought by both the Attorney General and the trio's lawyers over the sentences handed down in July. Our head of news, David Spencer, says Dame Victoria Sharp and 2 other judges have explained why they dismissed both applications.
In the Court of Appeal's written judgment, Dame Victoria said that no one doubts the seriousness of the offending in this case, and no one doubts the importance of the fact that the victim was a police officer, adding also that no one doubts the gravity of the harm caused. But the issue, she says in the statement before the court, must however be resolved in accordance with the law.
Heathrow Airport has won a Supreme Court challenge over its planned third runway. It had appealed a previous legal ruling which stated that the then Transport Secretary Chris Grayling didn't consider the Paris Climate Agreement when he supported the project. Lord Justice Sales has delivered the final decision.
The Court of Appeal appears to have thought that he did not take it into account at all. But with respect to them, that is not correct as a matter of fact.
8 days after the start of the coronavirus vaccination programme, 138,000 people across the country have now been inoculated. The Health Minister, Nadhim Zahawi, has described it as a really good start to the programme. Meanwhile, it's being suggested less than half of the UK will be vaccinated against COVID-19 next year. The NHS is hoping to inject 25 million over 50s with 2 doses throughout 2021. But the National Audit Office says coupled with an expanded flu vaccination programme, this will mean 50% of us having to wait another year. And a government source has insisted there'll be no change to the Christmas rules for England, despite growing concerns that the freedoms will cause a spike in infections. 3 families will be allowed to meet over a 5-day period. And Dr. Claudia Paolini, a consultant and president of the HSCA, it's the Hospital Doctors Union, has told Talk Radio it's obvious what could happen.
Christmas is in the winter, therefore Christmas is spent inside houses. If you have a lot of people in a smaller space, then you're going to have an increased contact. You've also got the additional problem that if you're moving across the country with different tiers, you're actually increasing the spread. We saw that as soon as the universities went back.
Further talks between the home nations on whether to tweak or revise the rules are continuing today. We have a band of heavy rain moving slowly from west to east today. It will be windy with gales in the west, but feeling mild.
Across the UK, Early Breakfast with James Max on Talk Radio.
Join me every weekday morning from 5 a.m. I'll bring you all the big news stories of the day. And I also want to hear what you have to say. So join me bright and early, live from 5.
Early Breakfast with James Max. Weekday mornings from 5 on Talk Radio. Mid-morning with Mike Graham. Talk Radio. The Independent Republic of Mike Graham on Talk Radio.
Welcome back to the Independent Republic of Mike Graham right here on Talk Radio. I've been asking for people to let us know what experiences they're getting from the NHS and various different testing mechanisms, various different regimes for giving the vaccination out. I've got one here from Jim who says, my dad had his vaccine at the local church yesterday. Took an hour and a half. It was complete chaos. Person taking his details laughed that he wasn't very good on laptops. And then he had to take his shirt off as well rather than roll up his sleeves. Interesting, isn't it? I mean, it's all very well talking about the rollout of this great life-saving vaccine, which doesn't necessarily stop you getting the disease or indeed spreading it. But if they can't actually give it to more than 150,000 people a week, that's going to be a bit of a problem, isn't it? It's going to be 9 years before we get to the end of it. Let's go to the phones. Michael's in Buxton. Hello, Michael.
Hiya, Mike.
How you doing?
Yeah, not very good. Total confusion here as well.
Yeah.
I'm a carer for my wife who's severely disabled. She's wheelchair-bound and virtually bed-bound.
Okay.
I made inquiries about a vaccine for her to make sure they got her in the right group. They wrote back and had her in the wrong group and also told me that I didn't have any priority because I was just going to be treated as a member of the public.
Right. Even though she's vulnerable?
Yes, she's vulnerable. So I pointed this out. I said, well, we have the flu jab every year together because of her situation. What's the difference with this?
Right.
So I've since made inquiries and I'm on with a reporter locally. There is a mention of adult carers in what's called a green book, which nobody's ever heard of. But it's only a guideline, so they don't have to do it. But people like receptionists and admin staff are a higher priority than me,
right? Even
though I'm looking after a severely disabled person at home. So
doesn't sound right, does it?
Chaos. Well, she's only 42 as well, which is another big problem because she's been disabled since her 20s.
Right.
And every time we have contact with the NHS, they look at her age first and think everything's roses in the garden.
Right.
But
it seems that they're just not very good at being able to cope with different situations, doesn't it? I mean, it seems as though it's a sort of one-size-fits-all NHS. So if you're not into one of the categories that they obviously think you should be in, they don't know what to do.
Well, the problem is if they're taking individual looks at these policies and making these decisions in areas, it's wrong.
Yeah.
And the NHS told me this morning the surgery have got it wrong. But are they going to get them to change it?
So what, the surgery that's telling you that they can't give you the vaccine have got it wrong?
Yes.
And they can't tell...
No, sorry. They've got it wrong putting her in the wrong group. She should be in a higher group.
Right, okay.
But because she's only 42, they're looking at like from 75 and over. She's clinically vulnerable, extremely clinically vulnerable.
Right.
So
what are you going to do?
Well, I've been on to my MP, but as usual, no response because you know what they're like.
Yeah.
I'm in touch with a reporter at the moment. He's trying to do a story locally,
yes,
but he's running into problems with confusion as well. But my point is, if my wife is extremely vulnerable. If she has the vaccine, that's fine. I don't want to jump the queue, but if I get COVID in between, we don't have anybody else to help her. She would end up in a residential home.
Yes. And what sort of tier are you in at the moment?
We're in tier 3 still, and I don't think they'll bring us down.
Right.
Because,
And you presumably must be very careful even if you go out shopping or anything.
Well, yeah, I mean, I can't. My wife's not been anywhere since March.
Right.
So I go out occasionally, at least I can, and I take extra precautions. I'll look at a shop. If it's too busy, I won't go in.
Right.
I go at certain times when it's quieter. I don't hang around, more than 5 minutes anywhere and get back. And such would, we've been okay so far.
Right.
But we could be in the right state if she gets the vaccine, which is fine, and I don't, and I get COVID. How many other people are in my situation? Not just me.
Yes. Well, I mean, I suppose the only good part about that, if there is to be a good part, would be if she has the vaccine, not quite in the first one, but once she's had the second one, she's less likely to become more seriously ill, according to the medics, anyway.
As long as there's not too much of a gap between me getting it, but what they said to me is I'm just going to go on the public list.
Yeah, well, that's not.
So that could be another year's time.
But, yeah, exactly. Because if you're in your 40s as well, then they ain't going to get to you.
I'm 54. She's 42.
Well, if you're under 60, they won't get to you before the summer, I don't think.
Well, I don't think they'll do it then, Michael.
Well, not the speed they're doing it at the moment, that's for sure. Well, listen, good luck with it, Michael. But that sort of highlights, doesn't it, the anomalies of the system. And it may well be that nobody is to blame. But the trouble is, the NHS is an incredibly inefficient organisation. I've said it many times. It's not about the fact that you can't criticise them, because you should be able to criticise them, because there are lots of things that they can't do. I mean, there he is being told by the NHS that his local GP surgery has put his wife in the wrong category, but they seem powerless to change it. Well, how does that work? They're supposed to be in charge of it. There's a minister of vaccination. What's he doing? Let's talk to Ryan in New Forest. Hi, Ryan.
Good afternoon, sir. How are you?
Very well indeed. How's it going?
Oh, it's been a while.
It has.
It's not too bad. Ups and downs and trials. And
still painting?
Sorry?
Are you still painting?
I am, yeah. I'm wallpapering today, actually.
Oh, good man.
The wall, actually.
Good man.
Yeah, so.
I see that Harry and Meghan are taking you on in the podcast stakes as well.
Yeah. At the end of the day, that just sort of highlights, I think, the sort of elite attitude towards, the importance of themselves and people. Don't get me started on the underlying narcissism of society, which has contributed to everything. But it's not what I phoned up for.
No, all right then.
It doesn't help, because it comes to a certain sort of entitlement, which I feel doesn't need to be eliminated in an Extinction Rebellion sort of way. But I'm an old school hippie. I'm not one of these new fascist lefties. I'm an old school one. There could be decent discourse and negotiation all around, and also a bit of decent planning, because it pains me so much. I'm a hippie. I'm a lefty. I voted out of Europe. I mean, I literally conflict with all of my liberal cohorts when it comes to this, and try and explain to them about how I just feel that the globalisation of society is no good for things. When a pandemic happens, I mean, you couldn't have written it. I would have said before, if something bad happens, this is all going to go wrong. And then the pandemic happens 2 years later, and it just highlights how, if you don't have a decently backed infrastructure, or at least a regulated society, which has things that can account for the shortfalls that may happen in the worst situation. Then, whilst you've got lots of people that are geared up to, we bailed out the banks 10 years ago. The amount of money we handed over is obscene. That could have just been sat there.
But now we're spending and wasting what I regard as an awful lot of money on things, instead of taking the opportunity, which I think you would agree with, to kind of re-look at the infrastructure and go, okay, I'll tell you what, if we're going to be spending all this money on paying people not to work, shouldn't we be spending money on creating jobs for them as well?
Well, that's exactly it. I mean, what we need to do is go back to the practicalities of living and it being tied to economy. So the fact is that people need money to live. You can't go out and kill deer anymore. So basically...
Well, you can, actually. Some people do.
Well, you can. But, I mean, if everyone did it, there wouldn't be any left. So we're basically, you know what I mean. But the thing is we're sort of getting into it. So really, we should have some sort of, basically, my thing with capitalism is that Britain as such has exported this sort of mentality of being a middleman, managing everything, outsourcing, insourcing, whatever you can do, as long as it shaves a buck and doesn't really care about whoever it affects. It seems to permeate through different levels. People want to climb this ladder without, slightly regardless. There are good people in it, but and like you say, why can't we restructure things? Like the NHS is probably only going to pop because they've only stopped faxing things like 3 years ago and stuff like that. There's literally no one that pulls the pants up these organisations and says, right, this needs to happen, this needs to happen. And then instead of it then going in someone's pocket, which it wouldn't be the NHS, but it will with other things, we need to have something which does account, which does need something there for people. Because at the moment, I mean, it's seriously affected my family, COVID. Like, really, really has.
No, listen, it's affected a lot of people's families. And I get criticised sometimes as somebody who doesn't take it seriously, which is not true. I do take it seriously. But what I also take seriously is the well-being of the communities in which we all live and the well-being of the economic communities in which we all live. And while I take your point that capitalism can be in some ways looking bad, it's also probably better than any other system, because all other systems involve capitalism effectively, whether it's personal capitalism or collective capitalism. Somebody's always in charge of something, and then if you've got the wrong people in charge, then you're never going to get a good outcome.
Well, definitely, I completely agree. But what I mean is that regulated, not necessarily like regulated financially, but it's just regulated through mindset, because like I say, it's tied to our lives. So we take jobs for granted, and like there's an end game of either sitting on a beach at the end of it and not having to work or something like that. But really, work is your life. Face it, whether you like it or not, and people do have to face it every day. So therefore, there should be, if there was more pride and your soul and pride was more tied into your everyday life, but then the actual people that were in charge of you reflected that back to you, you'd have people that were walking around with their heads up higher. And it just seems that really you either work hard for someone else, or if you do finally get the end game, it's at someone else's expense. And it just seems that it's just not very good for the soul, I don't think.
No, I think you may have a very good point, but it's a little bit probably, I would say, idealistic, Ryan. There's nothing wrong with being idealistic, of course, but I think the problem is that if you stand around and try and do nice things for people all the time, other people are not exactly like you, and so they will not be doing nice things for all people all the time. And unfortunately, there are some horrible people out there who will do some horrible things and profit from it sometimes, and if not, just continue to do them anyway. Because I think part of human nature in the end is to get ahead. Part of human nature is not to really share everything that you have apart from with your own family. I'm very happy to share much of what I have with my family, but I don't particularly want to share it with the people that live next door. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, is there? This is Talk Radio.
Online, on DAB, and on the Talk Radio app. Talk Radio.
Welcome back to the Independent Republic of Mike Graham right here on Talk Radio. One of the things that we do here with our YouTube channel, of course, is to do Plank of the Week. And we're getting very close into doing Plank of the Year, which is going to be out next week, of course, because that will be the last week of the year. And there's some pretty hot contenders for the top 10, I can tell you that. And we've got the last actual Plank of the Week going out today, right after this show. And I suggested somebody from the royal family, would you believe? And it wasn't Meghan and Harry. Well, not only does he not sweat, and that was the first lie that he told, it turns out that he's also now lied because the Mail have done this big investigation this week.
Stephen Wright, he's
great. Who's great, brilliant, right? He's done this big investigation in which they found that he actually did spend the night at Jeffrey Epstein's mansion in Manhattan, and I think it was maybe 2001, perhaps.
Perhaps in a bath.
Where Virginia, the girl who's accused him of basically having sex with her when she was underage, was not there at the time, but she said that he was there, but not with her. He's now been it's been exposed that he was actually there, and they've uncovered some kind of email which was sent confidentially to somebody in the royal household saying, "Oh yes, Prince Andrew will be staying with in a private residence that night, not with the ambassador."
But Epstein wasn't there either, was he?
No.
Andrew just using the
So Andrew was there. Well, you say that, but I mean, do you really use Jeffrey Epstein's mansion as a place to dosk? Because the question would have to be asked, well, maybe he wasn't with Virginia, but maybe he was with someone else.
Yeah. And why doesn't he help the FBI,
yes,
as he promised?
Well, as I said, whenever I was asked about him earlier in the year, in the Emily Maitlis interview, he said, I will seek legal guidance, and you're a barrister, so you'll know how this works. And if my legal advisors say it's a good idea to talk to the FBI, that's what I'll do. Yeah. So you can only conclude that they've told him it's not a very good idea, and so he's not talking to them. Very Christmassy atmosphere as well when you see Plank of the Week. We filmed it on the 17th floor. Jerry Hayes, the barrister, wearing a very, what can only be described as stylish jacket, stripy jacket, and some Christmas trees in abundance as well. So lots of things to see. That will be going out, as I said, very, very shortly after this show finishes today at 1 o'clock. Let's go back to the phones, 0344 499 1000. Let's talk to Ian, who's in Birmingham. Hi, Ian.
Hi, Mike.
How you doing?
I'm fine, thanks, Mike. I just wanted to give you a quick call because I've heard you getting very heated about the hospitality trade, which I totally understand and totally agree with. It's utter madness what's going on.
Yeah.
But what doesn't get mentioned on the radio very often, but I'm sure you are aware of it, is the suppliers to those restaurants.
Yes.
I work for a very large oriental food importer, and it's based in central London, and we supply most of Soho, Chinese restaurants, etc., etc.
Right.
And obviously in the first lockdown, they stopped ordering any food from us, which was catastrophic for our business.
Yes.
Losing large amounts of our trade. And then when it finally reopened again, they were very hesitant to reorder. They've just got into their stride.
Yeah.
And hallelujah, we're in tier 3 again in London, so they've all closed. They've placed some provisional bookings for Christmas because we're open for 5 days, but they won't pay for anything because we may close.
No. Well, that's right. And also, there's no guarantee because of that particular period. I mean, you're talking Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, Boxing Day. Not that many people go out for dinner, do they?
No, not at all. And then we're back into tier 3 and possibly even worse. Apart from the fact that in the Soho region, for example, I mean, obviously, they're catastrophic because it's not just the restaurant trade. It's also they're very, very reliant on foreign visitors.
Yeah.
And they're not coming anytime soon either. So I just wondered occasionally when people are saying pubs and restaurants whether they can tag on suppliers as well.
Yes, no, most definitely, because it's really it's the uncertainty more than anything, Ian, isn't it? Because you can't possibly commit to spending a bucket load of money on what is essentially a perishable item if you don't know if you can actually spend it well and wisely.
That's true, and also we pride ourselves. We fly a lot of fresh Chinese Oriental vegetables that you can't get in the UK. They come over.
Yeah.
That's okay in a weird way because it's a very quick turnaround. But we do literally have a slow boat from China carrying containers of food, which are weeks and weeks, months in the planning and the travel. And they're mid-ocean at the moment, and we have to pay for that, and we've no revenue.
Yes.
So we're having to work really hard with our suppliers.
And have you had to lose people, Ian, as well?
Well, we took advantage of the furlough, but obviously the first thing to go were all the new people that are under, it's a horrible thing to say, but less than 2 years employment because they're disposable, and that's a horrible word, but that's literally to stay afloat. Trying to get money out of the government, I hate watching the news press with people quoting headline billions of figures. Trying to get the money into your bank account is hoop through hoop. It's our directors, you know, you can see the other side of running a company.
Oh, listen, I'm sure it's nothing more stressful than having people to rely on you, but also other people who you supply relying on you. It's awful. Ian, thank you. I will certainly make sure that I can point that out to a lot of people as I speak to them about the hospitality sector and how dreadful it all is. Let's talk to Martin, who's in North Somerset. Hi, Martin.
Oh, hi, Mike. Yeah, I'm just going. I wasn't going to be talking about what Ian said, but having heard him speak, yeah. The thing is that it's all of these things are interconnected. I'm in the entertainment industry, and without that, you don't get the hospitality industry either in these big cities. And this is what the public come in to see, and then they go and have a meal and all the rest of it. Right. It's all interconnected, and it's been horrendous. A lot of people haven't worked for a year.
I know.
You know, but anyway, that wasn't really what I was ringing in about. It was about Neil talking about, you know, the use of child labour and all the rest of it, so that we can have our phones and our electric cars and all the rest of it. And I just wanted to extend that into the fact that we're not allowing people in sub-Saharan Africa are still cooking over log fires and dying before they're 30 with the pollution, and we're not allowing them to build power stations, despite the fact that they're sitting on, huge reservoirs of fossil fuels, because of this whole thing about the climate and man-made carbon dioxide.
Yeah. It's remarkable, isn't it? And also,
it's horrendous.
Yeah.
It's absolutely horrendous. So people are dying because of this. And Greta Thunberg, she says, "Oh, we're dying. Well, actually, you're making people die with this nonsense."
Yeah, it's true. It's true. And also, China has gone to Africa as the sort of new colonial power of this century and has basically bought up all of the mineral rights to everything they've got. So even in African countries where they've got some level of value in the ground, they're not able to cash that in.
To use it. No, exactly. And we're not allowing the people to make the power stations. So, I see this all the time on the news. They all do. Oh, give us £2 a month so that these people can have fresh water.
Yeah.
Hold on a minute. Let them build power stations so they can have fresh water. They can have electricity. They can have air conditioning. They can cook. They can cook in, without killing themselves.
Yes. You make a very good point. Thank you. You're just breaking up there, but thanks very much. Very good point, and a very well made one. We are nothing if we are not hypocrites, I think, in this world, in the West in particular. And I'm not going to be sitting here flagellating myself and saying that we should all be doing much better as individuals and we should all be kind and gentle and compassionate like Harry and Meghan. No, but what we can do is stop being hypocrites. Stop telling countries which don't have the ability to do what we can do that they can't do what they want to do. Don't start telling them that they can't, as we just heard there from our caller, build a power station because it might damage the planet. It's ridiculous. Absolute and utter madness. We've got lots more going on. 0344 499 1000 is the number, of course, you can call us on. You can tweet us at Talk Radio. You can send us a text to 87222. If you're getting involved in any of the rollout of these vaccines, we'd be delighted to hear from you because it doesn't sound as if it's going all that well. And I'm not going to sit here and bash the government for that, but what I am going to do is bash the NHS for it because the NHS needs to get its act together. I'm sick to death of hearing about how we have to protect the NHS and they don't have the ability to somehow administrate anything whatsoever at all, because that's what it sounds like to me. 0344 499 1000. Don't forget, coming up, we've got Prime Minister's question. Charlotte Ivers will be here, Boris Johnson will be here, Sir Keir Starmer might be here, or he might be at home. We're not quite sure. We'll let you know as soon as we know. This is Talk Radio.
Talk Radio.
Welcome back to the Independent Republic of Mike Graham right here on Talk Radio. As I said, Plank of the Year is coming out next week, so you want to look out for us on YouTube for that. If you haven't done it, by the way, what you should do is go to our YouTube channel and subscribe, because then you'll get all the great videos that we put out there all the time. Neil Oliver, Peter Hitchens, all the stuff that Julia Hartley-Brewer does, Dan Wootton, Ian Collins, of course, James Whale, Kevin O'Sullivan, all the good shows on this station that put out great videos, and you can watch them when we're not on the air. At your leisure. Let's talk now to Charlotte Ivers. She's our political correspondent, of course. She's down in Downing Street. Charlotte, very good just about afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
So, another day, another dollar, another few $1 billion, I suppose you might say. We've got the rollout of the vaccine going on today, but from our, I admit, only anecdotal evidence, it doesn't appear to be being handled with any great efficiency.
Well, the big problem the government have is they can't tell us how many people have actually had the vaccine yet. Now, part of that is a good sign because it means that everything is being done very locally. People are going to their local GPs and it's all very community focused. But there is a lot of calls for them to actually put a number out so that we can see how well they're doing on it.
What, like a daily number? Because we saw from Zahawi this morning, did we not, a weekly number, which didn't look particularly encouraging. And I'm sure that will improve. But I think 137,000 odd people at that rate, it would take 9 years for them to do the entire country.
Well, exactly. We're getting very, very limited data at the moment, and that number will be out of date pretty much as soon as it's said. Whereas, of course, with death rates, for example, we get those on a daily basis. So there are many calls for the government to get on top of that and be putting it out more.
Yes, exactly right. So what are we expecting today? I'm assuming that Sir Keir Starmer is back in the chamber after having missed it last week due to being in self-isolation. What's he going to be talking about?
I think he's quite likely to go on Christmas because he knows that he's got the public on his side on that one. There was a YouGov poll out yesterday saying that 57% of people think that the relaxation of the rules over Christmas is the wrong thing to do. It looks like Boris Johnson isn't going to back down and is going to power ahead with it. So it'd be quite a smart thing for Keir Starmer to talk about. But he will also have the problem he has every week, which is Boris Johnson will turn around to him and say, OK, then what would you do instead? And so far, Starmer hasn't told us what he's going to say. So it'll be interesting to see whether he can come up with something.
Yeah, and I mean, so far, the political noises coming from him have been all about sort of not doing things quickly enough and sort of still agreeing with what the government's doing, but not quite.
Exactly. Whereas on this, he has said that he has doubts about the government's plan. He just hasn't put in place what he'd rather do. Also looking as well today at Nicola Sturgeon and Mark Drakeford in Wales, because, of course, they can do what they want on Christmas. They don't have to go along with the Westminster government. And if they split from the government, and it feels likely they might do, that will be politically really contentious because that will just throw into sharp relief all of the different policies and there'll be able to be direct side-by-side comparisons of how well they actually work.
Yes. I mean, that's a good question, actually. I'm sure people would ask. Does Mark Drakeford answer in a way to Keir Starmer, or is it more of a kind of a mutual beneficial backslapping society?
It's reasonably separate, to be honest, and quite often that can be used against Keir Starmer by Boris Johnson in PMQs. You remember it became a sort of a trope that Theresa May would always bring up the NHS in Wales anytime Jeremy Corbyn tried to talk about the NHS, and they do tend to have slightly separate policies, but of course the two do communicate. They are intertwined in the way that they look at the world.
Right. Interesting stuff. Well, Michael Fabricant is currently zooming in from home to Boris Johnson and Prime Minister's questions. Let's have a look now.
Friend is absolutely right to stress the, in many ways, but to stress the importance of people taking care this Christmas, because although some things are unquestionably going well, Mr. Speaker, and I'm very pleased to tell the House that we have had a good start with the rollout of the vaccination programme, and in just 7 days, 108,000 people in England, 138,000 across the whole of the UK have received their first vaccination. We must remember that transmission takes place asymptomatically in so many cases. 1 in 3 people are currently asymptomatic with COVID, Mr. Speaker. That's why my honourable friend is absolutely right that we should exercise extreme caution in the way we celebrate Christmas. We can celebrate it sensibly, but we have to be extremely cautious in the way we behave.
We now go to the Leader of the Opposition, Right Honourable Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I join the Prime Minister in his good wishes to all the staff, to the armed forces and our emergency services? And can I thank you, Mr. Speaker, and the House authorities for doing all that you've done this year to keep Parliament safe and open in challenging circumstances? Mr. Speaker, since this is probably the last PMQs of the year, I want to look at some of the decisions the Prime Minister has made in the last 12 months. Let me start at the beginning of the pandemic, when images from hospitals in Italy and Spain were being shown on our televisions and the infection rates were rising in the UK. Does the Prime Minister now accept that his slowness to respond led to more deaths, a longer lockdown and a deeper economic damage?
Mr. Speaker, no, because at every stage we followed the scientific guidance and continue to do so. And he's right to draw attention to what's happening across the whole of Europe, and indeed there are spikes now taking place across the whole of the EU. And thanks to the tiering system that we have in place in large parts of the country, thanks to the heroic efforts of the people of the northwest, of the northeast, Yorkshire, Humber, we're seeing those rates coming down. And yes, it's true that we have spikes now in some parts of London and the southeast, but we will make sure that with our adjustments to the tiering that we conduct over the next few weeks, that we will address those issues. That is the right way forward for this country. That's how we'll defeat the virus, with vaccines, with community testing, and with tough tiering. And I think what people would like to hear in this season of goodwill to all men is a little bit of support from the right honourable gentleman for what the government is trying to do to beat coronavirus, and perhaps just a little less carping.
Keir Starmer.
Well, Mr. Speaker, if the Prime Minister won't listen to me, can I quote his own spending watchdog, the Office of Budget Responsibility? Because they said the UK locked down later and for longer than some of its European neighbours and experienced a deeper fall and slower economic recovery. Mr. Speaker, this isn't bad luck. It's not inevitable. It's a result of the Prime Minister's choices. But if the Prime Minister disagrees with me, perhaps he can tell us, why does he think that Britain, the sixth richest country in the world, with all our brilliant scientists and amazing NHS, ends the year with one of the highest numbers of COVID deaths in Europe, over 64,000, each one leaving a grieving family, and the deepest recession of any major economy? Why does he think that has happened?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the House will have noted his slight change of tune in his criticisms of the UK performance, but perhaps he could tell me why it is that the UK is the first to produce a viable treatment for coronavirus in the form of dexamethasone, or the first country in the world to roll out a clinically tested stage 3 vaccine. Mr. Speaker, this is a pandemic that has affected the whole of Europe, and this government has continued to take the tough decisions necessary to beat it. And I may say so, Mr. Speaker, without wishing to cast aspersions on the point of view of the honourable, right honourable gentleman. I would take his criticisms of the UK government's decisions a little more seriously, frankly, if he had been able to decide last week or even the week before whether he even supported the approach we were taking or opposed it. He couldn't do either, Mr. Speaker. He abstained.
Mr. Speaker, I said 2 weeks ago at this dispatch box that I was very concerned that Tier 2 would not be strong enough to hold the virus. The Prime Minister said, don't worry about that, just support us, throw away the problems. 2 weeks later, what have we got? The virus rising in Tier 2 and Tier 3, and I'll come back to that. But if the Prime Minister thinks that the highest death numbers and the deepest recession is somehow delivering for the British people, he's a long way removed from the truth. The problem is the Prime Minister makes the same mistakes over and over again. And 2 weeks ago, he unveiled that latest COVID plan. He told the House, as he's done so many times before, that his plan would suppress the virus. But the latest figures show the opposite, and the Prime Minister said spikes here and there. Let me tell the House, in 3 out of 4 Tier 2 areas, infections are going up. In over half of the Tier 3 areas, infections are going up. Exactly the concern I put to the Prime Minister 2 weeks ago when he said, just back us anyway. As a result, this morning, 10 million people moved into tougher restrictions, exactly what we said would happen, going up the tiers. Does the Prime Minister not recognise that his latest plan has once again failed to control the virus, protect the NHS and our economy?
Mr. Speaker, once again he criticises the government's plans without producing any kind of plan of his own. And actually, if you look at what is happening, he was the mastermind author of I seem to remember, of the Labour firebreak in Wales, Mr. Speaker. But if you look at what is happening across the country, it is thanks to the efforts of the British people that we are seeing significant reductions in the virus in some of the areas where it was really surging, and that is because of the hard work of the people of this country. And we will, of course, be continuing to reflect that as we go forward with the tiering approach. And we will continue to roll out the vaccine and roll out community testing, Mr. Speaker. And I may say, I think that his time would be better employed supporting those wonderful initiatives, supporting community testing, encouraging people to get a test, encouraging people to get a vaccine, rather than continually attacking what the NHS and what the government is trying to do.
I've encouraged everybody to have the vaccine every time I've stood up and talked about it. But the Prime Minister is just avoiding the issue. In some places, Prime Minister, in the last 7 days, infection rate has gone up 70%. Everybody knows this is a problem. The Prime Minister is yet again pretending it isn't. Another major mistake of the last 12 months, losing public trust. We all know what the tipping point was. The 520-mile round trip to Barnard Castle and the humiliating way in which the Prime Minister and his Cabinet chose to defend it. And now we learn Now we learn that while the Prime Minister and the Chancellor are telling the armed forces, police officers, care workers and firefighters that they will get a pay freeze, Dominic Cummings has been handed at least a £40,000 pay rise. How on earth does the Prime Minister justify that?
Well, Mr. Speaker, he totally trivialises the efforts of the British people in getting the virus down. He says, he says that that none of the measures, none of the lockdown measures have worked. It's absolutely untrue, Mr. Speaker. From November the 5th to December the 3rd, the people of this country came together once again to get the virus under control, and they may have made a huge amount of progress. We will continue with that tiering system, and we will get that virus down. And that is the best way forward for this country. All he wants to do, Mr. Speaker, is to lock the whole country down. He's a one-club golfer. That's the only solution he has. And then, Mr. Speaker, all he does is attack the economic consequences of lockdowns.
Mr. Speaker, you could script that from October and November, when he was saying a lockdown's the last thing the country needs, disastrous. 2 weeks later, he put it on the table and voted for it. Ridiculous. It's exactly the problem what we've got. Not learning from mistakes. And obviously we know about Dominic Cummings. It wasn't performance-related pay, Mr. Speaker. But I think the British people will find it pretty hard to understand why it's one rule for our key workers and another for his advisers. And it's now likely that the next big mistake will be over the easing of restrictions over Christmas. And this isn't smarmy lawyers. Let me give you the British Medical Journal. The British Medical Journal yesterday said this: "We believe the government is about to blunder into another major error that will cost many lives." The Prime Minister should listen to that advice, not just ignore it as usual. And if he really is going to press ahead with this, can he tell us what's the assessment, and has it been done, of the impact that it will have on infection rates and increased pressure on the NHS? What's the impact?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I wish he'd have the guts just to say what he really wants to do, which is to cancel the plans people have made and cancel Christmas. I think that's what he's driving at, Mr. Speaker. He's looking a bit blank. I think that's what he's driving at. But I can tell him that as of today, and just this morning, there is actually, as I say, unanimous agreement across all the UK government, across all the devolved administrations, including members of all parties, Mr. Speaker, including his own, that we should proceed in principle with the existing regulations, Mr. Speaker, because we don't want to criminalise people's long-made plans, Mr. Speaker, but we do think it's absolutely vital that people should, at this very, very tricky time, exercise a high degree of personal responsibility, especially when they come into contact with elderly people, and avoid contact with elderly people wherever possible. And that is how, by being sensible and cautious, not by imposing endless lockdowns or cancelling Christmas, as he would appear to want to do. That's the only implication I can draw from what he's said, Mr. Speaker, unless he wants to announce some other idea. That is the way we will continue to work together to keep this virus under control, to defeat it and take the country forward.
Keir Starmer. Here we go again, Mr. Speaker, ignoring the medical advice. And we know where that leads, because we've seen what happened in the last 9 months. And whatever the Prime Minister says, there's no escaping the brutal facts that Britain has one of the highest number of COVID deaths in Europe and the worst economic damage. Mr. Speaker, as this is the last PMQs of the year, I, for one, often wonder where the Prime Minister gets his advice from. Well, now I know, because I've heard the official newsletter of the Wellingborough Conservative Party. It's not on everyone's Christmas reading list, but it is a fascinating read, because it gives a lot of advice to wannabe politicians. It says this: say the first thing that comes into your head. It'll probably be nonsense. You may get a bad headline, but if you make enough dubious claims fast enough, you can get away with it. And it includes the December edition, the advice: sometimes it's better to give the wrong answer at the right time rather than the right answer at the wrong time. So, my final question to the Prime Minister is this. Is he the inspiration for the newsletter, or is he the author?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think what the people of this country would love to hear from the right honourable gentleman this season of goodwill is any kind of point of view at all on some of the key issues. I mean, this week he couldn't make up his mind whether it was right for kids to be in school or not, and havering completely. He couldn't make up his mind last week whether or not to support what the government was doing to fight COVID, and told his troops heroically to abstain. He couldn't make up his mind about Brexit, you'll seem to remember. We don't know whether he'll vote for a deal or not. Mr. Speaker, he can't attack the government. He can't attack the government if he can't come up with a view of his own. Mr. Speaker, in the words of the song, from all I want for Christmas is a view, Mr. Speaker. And it'd be wonderful if he could produce one. This government is getting on with delivering on the people's priorities. We're 20,000 more police, 50,000 more nurses, 48 new hospitals, and Mr. Speaker. And although it has been very tough and very difficult, and everybody appreciates the suffering and hardship that the people of this country have been going through, we are, by rolling out the vaccine, by community testing and by tough tiering, which I hope he supports, we are going to defeat coronavirus, Mr. Speaker, and we're going to take this country forward into a great 2021.
Boris Johnson's sounding quite enthused today, isn't he? That's all I want for Christmas is a view, though. Possibly one of the cheesiest lines of all time. I hope you didn't pay anybody a £40,000 pay rise to get that. But Charlotte Ivers is down in Downing Street and watching it all with us. Charlotte, you know, a couple of laughs today, at least, much welcome laughs, I suppose, given the seriousness of the situation we all find ourselves in. But predictably, as you say, we had the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer, asking for a kind of shutdown of Christmas, which won't happen, so that presumably after Christmas he can say, well, I told you should have shut it down.
Well, exactly. That's one of Keir Starmer's major ways of using PMQs, isn't it? He gets the questions in, and quite often at the time we think, oh, why is he going on that? That's not particularly damaging. But then he'll refer back to them a few months later. And as you say, it is the politics of I told you so. Yes. I think as well, the other good thing that Keir Starmer managed to do there was the highlighting of Dominic Cummings, because again, there's another purpose of PMQs, and that's to just rile up the Conservative benches. It's to kind of remind them of the things they don't like about Boris Johnson. Keir Starmer's very good at spreading disunity by going on the things that Boris Johnson has splits with his backbenchers on. Yes. So I thought those were his high points. But again, as we were saying beforehand, Boris Johnson was just able to say he's flip-flopping. He doesn't know what he thinks. And that, again, will be the takeaway. Yeah.
And I mean, what is the story with Dominic Cummings? Because it's all very well saying he got a £40,000 pay rise, but I thought he'd gone. So I mean, is he still working his way through the process of his notice period?
Well, the document says that he's in the process of leaving, and we know that he's not working in that building anymore. Right. We know that he had said he was going to leave at the end of the year, so it could be the case that he's on some sort of gardening leave, but it's not quite clear what's going on yet.
It's a bit like Brexit, isn't it? I mean, maybe it's just going to go on for 4 more years and he'll still be somehow connected to Downing Street, still be getting paid.
Well, look, at that amount per year, I reckon that'd be quite a nice lifestyle.
It wouldn't be bad. Now, our good friend Mr. Ian Blackford is up. Let's see who he's asking for money for this week.
People in Scotland now need to know the price they will be forced to pay. Ahead of any vote in Parliament, will the Prime Minister commit to releasing a detailed economic impact assessment of the cost to the UK of his extreme Tory Brexit plans?
Well, Mr. Speaker, there's every opportunity, notwithstanding the slight uncharacteristic air of gloom from the right honourable gentleman, there's every opportunity, every hope I have that our friends and partners across the Channel will see sense and do a deal. And all that takes is for them to understand that the UK has a natural right, like every other country, to want to be able to control its own laws and its own fishing grounds, which ought to be important, I would have thought, to the right honourable gentleman. But whatever happens in the next few days, I know that this country will prosper mightily on the terms that we agree with our European friends, whatever they may be, whether they're Australian or Canadian. He can go forward with a high heart and confidence into 2021, knowing there are great opportunities for Scotland and the rest of the UK.
Ian Black.
I'm not quite sure what that was, Mr. Speaker, because it certainly wasn't an answer to the question. And I'm not surprised, because the Prime Minister didn't want to answer the question, because he knows that the United Kingdom is poorer and worse off as a result of the extreme Tory Brexit, and the costs continue to soar. The Warwick study estimates that Scotland has already lost £4 billion as a result of Brexit. Bloomberg Economics estimate the UK has lost £200 billion by the end of this year, and Scottish Government analysis estimates every person in Scotland on average will be worse off to the tune of £1,600. Mr. Speaker, Scotland has been completely ignored by Westminster throughout the Brexit process, and now we're being kept in the dark over the devastating price we'll be forced to pay. People in Scotland aren't willing to suffer the consequences of this economic vandalism. 16 consecutive polls have shown a majority for independence, and Mr. Speaker, it's little wonder. Isn't it as clear as day that the only way left to protect Scotland's interests and our place in Europe is for Scotland to become an independent country?
Again, Mr. Speaker, despite the gloom that the right honourable gentleman seeks to spread about Scotland and the rest of the UK currently has the highest youth employment in the G7. I point perhaps I could have made to with advantage of the right honourable gentleman opposite, and lower unemployment than France, Italy, Spain, United States, and Canada. And of course, there is a threat to the Scottish economy, sadly, and that is the high tax regime, the mismanagement of the Scottish Nationalist Party. That is the problem that Scotland faces, and I hope that the people of Scotland can see it.
Mr. Speaker,
Ian Blackford there talking, as he always does, about the cost of everything to Scotland and how Scotland is constantly ignored. Considering that Scotland gets ignored by Prime Minister's questions every single week whenever he stands up and talks about them, it doesn't really quite hold any water, does it? Let's go back to Charlotte Ivers, who's down in Downing Street for us. The other, I suppose, laugh that we didn't get to, Charlotte, was the Wellingborough Conservative Association newsletter, which Keir Starmer suddenly produced. I mean, I couldn't help thinking when he was reading that out that somebody had handed him a spoof newsletter. I mean, presumably whoever wrote that was joking.
Well, it is quite remarkable, isn't it? It's just one local Conservative association. So, of course, it doesn't really have a huge impact on the National Conservative Party. But it was a nice gesture, I think, for Keir Starmer to be able to bring it out. And clearly you could actually see both men enjoying themselves there at the end. I thought that was quite remarkable. We haven't really seen that at all this year, both of them with a grin on their faces.
Yes, well, that's true. I mean, it was, as I said, a much needed sort of bit of light relief, even if it was pretty lame on some counts. But I mean, here we are, last Prime Minister's questions of the year, as they said. We've also been told that it may well be next Monday, Tuesday and or Wednesday for a vote in Parliament on some kind of Brexit deal. What's the latest on that?
Yes, so there were loads of rumours flying around yesterday because backbench Tory MPs were being spoken to by senior people in government who were saying, clear your diaries next week. We probably got a Brexit deal, so you're going to need to be free to come and vote on it. Now, everyone got a bit overexcited about that, thought maybe the deal is done. Downing Street had pushed back saying, no, we're not actually very close to a deal. But of course, if we do get one, we do need people to be there. We need everything to move smoothly. So Downing Street say that was just a contingency planning, a bit of forward planning. But they've never done that before, so it's probably quite a positive sign.
Yes, well, the thing is, I mean, as Andrew Bridgen said to us the other day, it's going to be quite difficult for Parliament to scrutinise any deal at this point because, quite frankly, there isn't really enough time, is there?
There isn't really, and this is one of the big things that MPs have been calling for. If they're going to vote on a deal on Monday, they want to see the deal at very latest by the end of this week. Now, of course, that may not be possible, and they may just have to deal with it, to be honest, because, of course, that deadline will not move for anyone. So this could mean that you get people with a lot of buyer's regret. They may vote for the deal, then read it properly and think, hang on, I'm not so sure about this.
Yes, well, that remains to be seen. We'll come back to you, Charlotte. Stay where you are. Charlotte Ivers, Talk Radio's political correspondent, live in Downing Street. Prime Minister's questions still ongoing. We'll keep you updated with all of that as it reflects on what is going on. But this will be the last Prime Minister's questions of the year, effectively. So we won't be back to Downing Street and the House of Commons, really, properly, until next year. However, there might be something next week on Brexit. We shall see. This is Talk Radio.
Talk Radio.
Welcome back to the Independent Republic of Mike Graham, right here on Talk Radio. It is time, of course, for the news with Amelia Cox.
Talk Radio. Half-hour headlines.
The Prime Minister says his decision to relax coronavirus restrictions over Christmas is supported by all 4 nations of the UK.
Because we don't want to criminalise people's long-made plans, Mr. Speaker, but we do think it's absolutely vital that people should, at this very, very tricky time, exercise a high degree of personal responsibility, especially when they come into contact with elderly people, and avoid contact with elderly people.
Boris Johnson has been accused of once again ignoring medical advice by the Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer. Yesterday, 2 medical journals issued a joint warning that the plans to allow 3 households to form a bubble over the festive period could cost lives. A coroner has concluded air pollution did play a role in the death of a 9-year-old girl who died following an asthma attack in 2013. Ella Kissi-Deborah had suffered numerous seizures and made almost 30 hospital visits in the 3 years prior to her death. It's believed to be the first time in the UK an inquest has recorded air pollution as a medical cause of death. The Court of Appeal has ruled the sentences given to 3 teenagers for the manslaughter of PC Andrew Harper will not be changed. 19-year-old Henry Long was sentenced to 16 years, and 18-year-olds Jesse Cole and Albert Bowers were handed 13 years in July for killing the officer in August 2019. And the way UK airlines have dealt with their passengers during the pandemic is being investigated by the competition watchdog. It will look into whether they breached consumer rights by not offering a cash refund to customers who were unable to take a flight. The weather, rain pushing into eastern and northern areas this afternoon, blustery showers in the west.
Julia Hartley-Brewer at breakfast on Talk Radio.
Join me, Julia Hartley-Brewer, every morning from 6:30 with an essential mix of straight-talking debate, heavyweight political guests and fearless comment.
Julia Hartley-Brewer at breakfast, weekday mornings from 6:30 on Talk Radio. Mid-morning with Mike Graham. Talk Radio. The Independent Republic of Mike Graham on Talk Radio.
Welcome back to the Independent Republic of Mike Graham, right here on Talk Radio. Ian Collins coming up just before 1 o'clock to tell us what's coming up on his show. Dan Wootton, of course, here from 4 o'clock. Prime Minister's questions still going on, but we won't be going back there just for the moment, because instead there's something much more interesting to listen to, and that is, of course, something you'll have heard slightly, a little bit this morning on the news report, because it's Tom Cruise basically lacing into the people that he works with because they were unable, apparently, to socially distance properly. And he was upset because basically he's saying, if you guys have to have this set closed down, an awful lot of people will be out of work. Let's have a listen.
We are creating thousands of jobs, you I don't ever want to see it again. Ever. And if you don't do it, you're fired. And I see you do it again, you're gone. And anyone on this crew does it. That's it. And you too, and you too, and you. Don't you ever do it again. That's it. No apologies. You can tell it to the people that are losing their homes because our industry is shut down. It's not going to put food on their table or pay for their college education.
I think this is going to do Tom Cruise the world of good, because up until now, right, everybody's gone, yeah, he's a bit weird though, isn't he, with that whole Scientology thing that goes on, and, you know, it gives all his money to these people that think aliens have actually, you know, come and landed on the earth and all of that nonsense, L. Ron Hubbard, etc., etc., etc. But this is a guy, look, regardless of whether you think the COVID regulations are right or wrong, and obviously if you're in a working environment, you have to believe that they're right, because otherwise you can't work there, you have to say he's passionate, he's responsible, and he is absolutely all for not pulling any punches. And in the world in which we now live, where you can't speak to people like that, Tom Cruise gets away with it because he's genuinely a superstar. He is Tom Cruise. If it's not for him, there is no Mission Impossible. There is no franchise. There is no Hollywood. So I, for one, am actually going to take my hat off to Tom Cruise for talking like that, despite the swearing, which of course I would never endorse. On the radio, at least, anyway. And the point is that Tom Cruise, I think, will find that he has a whole new army of fans now. Tom Curse is what they're calling him in the Sun. Strop Gun, the Blast Samurai, Eyes Wide Shut It. Not bad. I mean, we need a little bit of laugh in this day and age, don't we? Well done, Tom. You have my vote. Let's go to Anne, who's in Merseyside. Hello, Anne.
Hi, Mike.
How you doing?
I'm very well, thank you.
Good.
I just thought I'd phone in and let you know that my mum and dad, both 88, have had their COVID vaccine today.
Okay.
They were telephoned on Sunday evening at 7 o'clock asking them to go along today at 11:45 in Maghull in Sefton, which is in Merseyside. We're tier 2 at the moment.
Right.
And we got there at 11:30. They went in at 20 to 12. Their appointment was at 11:45. And they came back into the car at 18 minutes past 12, and they've got their appointment for the next jab in January. And I'm absolutely delighted.
Sounds like it all went very well then. Was it in the actual GP surgery?
No, it wasn't. It was at the local town hall. They had the marshals telling you where to go and park. The parking bays were all set up so that it was COVID parking only. And it was brilliant. Couldn't fault it.
Great. And how are they feeling, both of them?
Absolutely fine.
Good.
Absolutely
well, that's some
fine.
good news.
Delighted to get it. We've had great service from the NHS. My dad was in hospital 999 in April.
Right.
And the care he had, which we didn't think he'd come out, was brilliant. The care package they put in place for him afterwards was great. And I can't fault the NHS with the COVID vaccine at all.
That's good. And are they living together at home then? Is that their living
together.
situation?
Yes, they live together at home. They've been married 65 years this month.
Blimey. They should get a medal for that alone.
An absolute medal. My mother deserves it this year, let me tell you.
I bet.
Me.
Well, that's great news. Well, listen, very good news, Anne. Thanks very much indeed for letting us know. Anne in Merseyside saying her 2 parents got the COVID vaccine today. Absolutely no problems at all. Didn't take very long, and it's good to know that that is the case for some people. It's not the case for everyone, and if you want to tell us about your experience of it, by all means do. 0344 499 1000 is the number. Charlotte Ivers is with us down in Downing Street. Charlotte, let's talk a little bit about the whole Scottish situation, because I mused that Ian Blackford MP was likely to ask for more money, but the one thing you can always assume that will happen when Ian Blackford gets up is that he'll ask for independence. He'll say Scotland is continually ignored, despite the fact that he asks a question every week, and he'll ask about the cost and the financial cost of Brexit and or the coronavirus. So he hit the jackpot this week, I think.
He did. It was very much Ian Blackford, the greatest hits this week, as it is many weeks, to be honest. On the issue of the devolved nations, some breaking news I've got for you in the last couple of minutes. Saw Boris Johnson there standing up and saying that all the nations of the United Kingdom are united on Christmas and will be doing the same thing. 10 minutes later, Mark Drakeford, the First Minister of Wales, has said that he won't be changing the law, but he will be advising people to only meet up with 2 households, not with 3, over the Christmas period. And then just breaking as well, Nicola Sturgeon now advising people only to meet up on Christmas Day in their bubbles. So there is now some divergence. The law will remain the same, but the devolved government's clearly limiting the amount of contact they want people to have.
So what they're really doing is sort of pushing the envelope, aren't they? Because, I mean, the government in London this morning said that basically they wanted to change the messaging rather than change the law. So they didn't want to rearrange the days. They just wanted to sort of try and encourage people just to be very careful. And if they are meeting, to adhere to the advice, which is to open all the windows and sit about 2 metres away from one another. So I hope you've got a big house.
Exactly. And the government have been very clear for a long time now that this is about personal responsibility. They want people to view the law as the absolute outer limits, not as an aim to get to, and people should be safe within that. What they haven't been as hot on has been publishing what the actual guidance for that looks like. So as you say, keeping the windows open, maybe isolating beforehand, maybe getting a private test if you can afford it before visiting elderly relatives. So I think we'll see over the next couple of days a lot of government communication communications efforts put into telling people what being safe actually looks like.
Yes, which brings us back again to the whole testing procedure, doesn't it? Because it's all very well if you say go and get a private test if you can afford it, but a lot of people trying to get tests for their members of their families. We're going to be talking to somebody tomorrow about this, where you come back from abroad to try and spend some time, you get a test and release situation, but very few people are able to get those simply because they're not in every single part of the country.
Well, exactly. And there are a few circumstances in which you will be able to get a test. Obviously, the one throughout we've had is if you've got symptoms. But the other one is if you are visiting a relative in a care home, one person will be able to get a test and then pop in to visit them. So that is some consolation for those families who may have not seen their relatives for a long, long time now.
No, exactly right. And what's being said, if anything, inside the hallowed halls about what happens after Christmas? Because obviously New Year is a tricky time, isn't it? Because we've already been told that, for example, the London Underground trains are not going to be putting on special trains to carry people around. They're telling people that the trains are going to stop running at 11 o'clock, I think, in order to stop people from gathering. Restaurants are being told to kick people out at 11 o'clock if they're able to open at all, because we don't even yet know whether they will be. So, I mean, it's going to be an interest. I mean, you know, I know Christmas is everybody's focus at the moment, but they're going to have to be thinking about what happens after Christmas.
They really are. And New Year is a real crunch time for the government. Michael Gove has been chairing a Cabinet Office committee every single day, a unit who are working on what the government are calling the nightmare scenario. So you have a situation whereby you have the government looking at no-deal Brexit possibly happening, looking at the NHS being overwhelmed just with flu and with cold. You also have a situation whereby we could have adverse weather, flooding, for example, and then on top of that, coronavirus. So the government are heavily focused on mitigating the impacts of all four of those things and putting everything they can into stopping all of them from happening at the same time.
Yes, I think that's absolutely right. Charlotte, great to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. Charlotte Ivers, political correspondent down in Downing Street there for the final Prime Minister's questions of the year, because we won't be having one next week, even though they might be back in Parliament next week voting on some kind of Brexit deal. As of yet, we don't know whether there will be a Brexit deal. I mean, Boris intimated in that last PMQs there that, you know, they should be looking forward to getting a deal, and that, in fact, the European Union partners, as he called them, should be working towards a deal. But whether or not he actually wants a deal, whether or not he will get a deal, we don't actually know. But we will, of course, take your calls on it. 0344 499 1000. If you are in a situation where either your parents or your relatives are getting this vaccine today, be very, very interested to hear from you as to how well that's going. And any other situations where you're trying to get tested, because, of course, what we hear all the time now is that testing is the answer. But is testing also possibly leading us down the wrong road? We shall see. 0344 499 1000. Don't forget, Plank of the Week out right after this show, after 1 o'clock. So you can watch that on YouTube. Go there and subscribe to it. This is Talk Radio. Welcome back to the Independent Republic of Mike Graham right here on Talk Radio. Lots more for us to do, of course, between now and Christmas as we try and figure out precisely what it is that is going on. You just heard Charlotte Ivers telling us there that, of course, Mark Drakeford and now Nicola Sturgeon have said that they will slightly alter their advice to people over Christmas so that they are not entirely in tune with Boris Johnson, but they're not really out of tune with him either. They're just kind of making what would seem to be a political point, saying that, you know, they would prefer you only to mix with two families rather than three. And I mean, I think everybody is in the same boat here. Everybody will make a decision based upon the welfare of various different members of their extended families. And some people won't need to invite more than two households. Some people won't need to invite more than one household. But, you know, I think what's being said now is that they're not going to change the rules after people have already made plans for what they want to do. And I think that seems fair, doesn't it? 0344 499 1000 is the number. Anthony's in Wigan. Hello, Anthony.
Hello.
How are you doing?
Good, thank you. Nice to speak to you.
Yeah, good to talk to you. What do you want to tell me?
Basically, just quickly wanted to tell you my experience with COVID. I had a great uncle who went into hospital after a stroke during the first wave, and he caught COVID in hospital.
Right.
Luckily, he did get through it.
Good.
And then my mother, who has multiple sclerosis, she had a fall during this second wave.
Right.
She went into hospital. 3 weeks later, testing COVID positive.
Right.
She ended up on a respirator and things. Luckily, she has also got through it.
Goodness.
But, you know, it's not really a safe environment.
Well, I think it's very, very right and true to say that the most dangerous place and the most likely place to catch COVID is in a hospital.
Yeah.
No question, right? And how are they both? And how are they both? How are they both now? Are they okay?
They're okay. They're surviving.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
I don't know how they would resolve that issue, but surely something should be done to try to minimise that.
Yes. Well, I mean, supposedly there's PPE for the staff. There's presumably PPE for the patients as well. But I mean, I suppose like everything. I mean, I've never enjoyed going to hospitals, and I haven't been fortunate enough not to be in them too often. But I've been in them for the birth of my kids and that kind of thing. And I always feel like I'm going to catch something in a hospital because that's where all the diseases are.
I mean, it does make sense, but I just don't know how they would resolve it because they're wanting people to go in and continue with the regular health checks and things. But if there's a vastly increased chance of catching COVID when you go to hospital, then surely that's going to deter people from going.
And I think it absolutely has, Anthony. Thanks very much for your call, Anthony in Wigan there, making a very good point. And isn't it true that hospitals are? I mean, of course, they're great healing centres as well. But interesting that both of his parents, but neither of whom sound as though they would be described as not vulnerable. They certainly would be described as vulnerable. One of them ends up on a respirator. Both of them survive COVID, which tells you that is at least something. Let's talk to Chris, who's in Redcar. Hello, Chris.
Hi there, how are you doing?
Yeah, very well, sir. What can I do for you?
It was just with regards to the testing. We own a business in Redcar, and one of our customers was telling us a few weeks back that her parents, who are elderly, I think they were in their early 80s, they went for an outdoor test centre for the test. They had an appointment. When they got there, they were met by a guy who had a sign saying, "Keep your window up, turn your engine off."
Right.
It was all pretty organised, pretty well.
Right.
Anyway, the guy told them to fill out the form, and he'll take the form away, and someone else will come back and test them. The couple waited there over an hour.
Really?
There was no other cars round about, so it was only them.
Right.
They waited over an hour. They couldn't get out the car, so they drove home.
What, so nobody ever came back to them?
No, nobody. They just they forgot about them.
Right.
A few days later, they got a letter through the door saying that they tested positive.
But they hadn't taken a test?
They hadn't taken it, no.
Blimey.
And another
was this like was it an army set up, this?
I don't know if it was army or not. I think so. I'm not sure. It's in Redcar itself.
Right.
I mean, I pass it nearly every other day, and it's always empty.
Right. Well, I would see. I've seen lots of pictures of these testing centres, outdoor testing centres, which are sort of running car parks and things, and they're almost always empty.
Yeah. I don't know where they're getting all these numbers from, but it seems like they're just making them up. I mean, I had another customer this morning who said that her friend has to test every week. I don't know if it was due to her health or if it was due to her work.
Right.
She was getting tested every week. It was coming back positive every week. So she thought, I'll send the test without doing it.
Right.
And she sent it away and it come back positive as well. So the numbers just aren't adding up.
Well, I mean, this is the trouble, isn't it? And also, even if it is a positive test, without knowing what the outcome of that test is, it's really difficult to make any kind of decision. Chris, thanks very much indeed. I mean, Keir Starmer, in Prime Minister's Questions, was talking about how some areas, the infection rate's going up 70%. I heard Tobias Elwood talking to Julie Hartley-Brewer this morning, and she very rightly corrected him when he said, we've got many more positives now than we had back in April. And she pointed out quite correctly that, well, that's because nobody was getting tested back in April because we didn't have the wherewithal to do that. So now that people are getting tested, guess what? More of them are showing up as positives. John's in Rotherham. Hi, John.
Mike, how do you do?
Very well, sir. Well, nice to speak to you. What can I do for you?
Mike, I just thought I'd ring with a quick one in relation to yourself and Peter Hitchens.
Yes.
I'd taken yours and Peter's advice about writing to my MP. My MP's a new Conservative MP in the Rother Valley, Alexander Stafford, and he got elected last year as one of the crossing over from the Red Wall MPs.
Right.
So I wrote a letter to him. I got a very nice reply on House of Commons paper. And I'd expressed my concerns about the whole overreaction to the pandemic. Anyway, when the tier vote went ahead on the 1st of December, I emailed him a few days beforehand, basically, as you and Peter had advised, saying that I voted for him in the last election. I expect him to vote against the government.
Yes.
And I then, on the day of the vote itself, found out that he voted with the government, and I wrote another email to him,
right,
expressing my concern about the fact that he was complicit in the economic downfall of this country by voting with Boris and crew.
Right.
And to my dismay, a couple of days later, I got a reply to both emails. The email that I got back was just a generic email, quite a lengthy one, but it was exactly the same email to both. Exactly the same reply to both emails.
Was it?
Showed that the email had not been read,
right,
not been read by a human, and quite clearly some computer program, no doubt, picked a few words out and sent an automatically generated response to me.
Right.
Basically, just informing me of the government mantra about why it was important to vote the tier system in.
Yes, that's a bit disappointing, really, isn't it?
It is, and it just, I'm just following your and Peter's.
Well, the
advice.
reason
it
also
shows the disdain that they treat us with.
Yes. Well, I think you'll be entitled now to write another one, and Peter's always very clear about this, that keep it polite, don't be rude, there's no need for that, and I'm not suggesting you would be anyway, but, let them know that as a result of the email response that you've had, which has not been satisfactory, you will find it very difficult to vote for them when they ask for it next time.
Oh, that's exactly what I did in the emails that I sent. I even went as far as emailing Sir Graham Brady.
Oh, yeah.
Just slightly before the tier vote, informing him that I had concerns that with my MP being a brand new out of the box one,
yes,
that no doubt he would be very easily bullied, as you can be bullied in Boris Johnson's government, into voting with the government, and that as a lifelong Tory voter, I would hope that he could actually do something about it. I've never had a reply from Sir Graham Brady's office.
Yes, interesting. Well, keep it up is all I would say, John, because I think scrutiny is the way forward, and the way forward, I think, for all of us is to not take the foot off the gas and to make sure that they are absolutely aware of what it is that they are doing. Thanks very much indeed. How about this from Mark, who says, thanks to Neil Oliver and Mike on Talk Radio for speaking out for those of us that haven't earned since March and have not been propped up by the taxpayer, like so many of the smug virtue signallers I see each day coddled in my tax-funded subsidies. And Bright Spark says this: hello, Mike. My 84-year-old mum lives with us, and I thought I'd let you know that she has been called up for her first COVID vaccine injection next week. We have been doing our utmost to protect her and feel very relieved that she got the call. Best wishes. Well, I mean, a lot of people are getting the call, but unfortunately, we haven't yet got the numbers as to how many people are getting vaccinated. We'll probably know, presumably, later on today. If indeed there is information, I'm sure there will be some given out. Mr. Collins is here. Ian, a very good afternoon to you.
Afternoon, Mike. We've been, sort of on the back of that, really, we've been looking at a different kind of industry each day.
Yeah.
And the big one, obviously, is hospitality, so we're going to have a look at that. Pubs, bars, restaurants, clubs, etc.
They're all shut, aren't they?
Completely closed.
I mean, I suppose there's some places in Tier 2 still where they can...
But even when you can, I mean, in London... we experienced a little bit of Tier 2 for half an hour.
Right.
And then straight into Tier 3 after. Sandwiched between the lockdown and Tier 3 was a moment of Tier 2. And even that wasn't great.
Well, I mean, how do they know as well, right? They go from a 4-week lockdown in which it apparently appears that the rate of infection went up. They then go into a slightly less of a lockdown, which they don't leave for long enough to know whether it works, and then they change it again.
Well, Keir Starmer, who's slowly becoming my political hero.
Scrooge, as he's known in this office.
I jest, obviously.
Yeah.
Remember the song and dance he made about the Prime Minister should have done a 2-week lockdown like Wales?
Yes.
And look what happened in Wales.
Yeah.
When the lockdown eased, everything shot up, like royally
Well, this
shot
is
up.
it. I mean, the mantra now seems to be, no matter what we do, it's going to shoot up. That's what happens.
And I've heard nothing from Starmer on his real views on the Christmas break. Keep saying the Prime Minister's got to look at this. Okay.
Right.
The Prime Minister might look at it. What's your view?
Right.
No view.
Right.
We have nothing.
He has nothing.
Sadiq Khan wants that closed, that open, but only if it's the opposite of what the Prime Minister
He changes it every week.
Unbelievable.
I know.
Unbelievable.
And they're not running trains on New Year's Eve until after 11 o'clock, apparently. Because I think that's going to stop people going out on the streets.
All worked out.
Good luck with that.
Yeah. got it all worked out. So that and more, and Boris's speech at 3:30, I think it is, we'll have live as well.
Okay, brilliant. Ian Collins coming up after the news at 1 o'clock. We will be here, of course, back again at 10 tomorrow.
Talk Radio.